There were vast mountain ranges that resembled a desert, known as barren lands. Within these barren lands lived a gigantic mutant octopus of B-class danger level, a soft-bodied creature. This octopus was a colossal beast with massive teeth, large legs, and tentacles instead of arms. It was in attack mode. Suddenly, a man, with wild hair and a red scarf, charged through the air, hands poised for battle, ready to strike. Focused and confident, he aimed to land a fiery blow on the creature. With sharp eyes and unwavering assurance, he delivered a forceful punch. But as the blow connected, he quickly realized that the skin of this monster was too soft, and the momentum of his strike vanished instantly. The octopus, its eyes burning red with fury, glared at him. Recognizing the peril he was in, the man ducked, bracing for the inevitable hit, eyes clenched shut. But just as he feared, a girl appeared, splitting the monster's tentacles into numerous smaller pieces. Unfazed, she told him to fall back. Grateful, he flashed a wide smile and stepped aside. The enormous blue creature stared at its tentacle in confusion as its arm began regenerating rapidly. In mere moments, the entire limb was fully restored. The man and woman, positioned for combat, realized their attacks had been ineffective. The sharpened spear tip skidded over the barren earth, leaving behind golden streaks in its wake. The man wielding the spear declared that if regular attacks weren't working, he'd try something else. The blue-haired man smirked wickedly. But the girl shot him a menacing look, telling him to stay silent. The very next second, the man with the spear summoned magic, creating a golden magic circle around him. Holding the spear out in front, he invoked his divine enhancement. Energy surged through his body, his eyes glowing with a vivid pink hue. He unleashed a 9-layers chain that shot out with lightning speed, its golden tips aiming straight for the immobilized octopus. In the blink of an eye, the chains wrapped around the mutant's forearm, its shoulders, chest, biceps, and neck, leaving the creature completely restrained. Fully bound, the octopus struggled in vain. The spear-wielding man shouted as he called upon the power of his weapon, summoning the magic of the 9-layers chain once again. This time, the magic surged with even greater strength, electricity coursing through the chains as they struck the mutant octopus, causing it to convulse violently. The creature's teeth sharpened, and its eyes grew darker as its body entered a rapid regeneration phase. Roaring in fury, the octopus snapped the chains, its body shifting to a deep, fiery red, like the core burning inside of it. In a final, breathless collapse, the beast fell, its body defeated. The man declared that it was over. He felt as though the creature had consumed everything in these lands, assuming its power was far beyond B-class. However, the spear wielder remained cautious, certain that with just a little more effort, they would all have to retreat. But then, an eerie red glow began to emanate from the octopus's massive belly. They all realized that the seemingly lifeless monster was about to give birth. From the belly of the beast, enormous claws emerged, sharp and deadly. The second creature, a massive demonic fetus, pushed its way out, leaving its master's lifeless body behind. This new creature, desiccated and of S-class hazard, had 4 spindly arms, with the core of the former monster as its head. Its head, shaped like an egg, twisted as it locked eyes with them. In an instant, it released a red ball from its head, and shot out the screamed face-like beam that tore through the stone mountains, leaving a massive hole in its wake. The blue-haired guy remarked that if things continued like this, there would be no escape for their team. Suddenly, his attention shifted, and he became puzzled, unsure of what was happening. Curious, the demonic with desiccation germ was also wonder and puzzle. Revealed a gargantuan creature in the sky, its wings resembling those of a gargoyle, its body a blend of minotaur, horns, and a reptilian tail. The spear-wielding man called for his team to take cover, realizing that this creature was far worse than anything they had encountered. The desiccation germ monster observed with massive eyes as the gargoyle-winged beast ravaged the barren lands, and unleashing a devastating red beam. A dark purple glow appeared in the sky, shaped like a cross, and this energy summoned another gargoyle-like creature. The beam, charged with power, descended from the sky, striking the ground near the demonic fetus, scorching everything in its path. As the smoke cleared, a crater formed where the purple beam had struck. The team huddled under the protection of the spear guy, who tried to keep their spirits up. He sarcastically commented on how the gargoyle-winged monster didn't even give them a warning before attacking. Meanwhile, the spear wielder's abilities were all being used to suppress the relentless demonic onslaught. Moments later, the dome shattered, and its energy depleted. The spear guy sighed in relief, thinking they were safe until, out of the mist, a figure appeared. A woman, wearing purple-heeled boots, stepped forward and announced that defeating the monster had cost her little effort. As queen, she was exactly what they needed. The spear guy didn't feel much upon her arrival, but the woman seemed to read his mind, mocking him. She told him that the one who had decided to save the world was weak, and that she had much to teach him before he could truly become the king of these lands. Nervously smiling, he thought to himself that, in any case, he had already surprisingly become the ruler of the kingdom. The creature they had been facing in the sky was none other than Demon Queen Isabella, whose danger level was immeasurable, and she is the wife of the spear guy man. Long ago, the plains of Xiaoluo were home to many tribes, but among them, only two were the strongest, the demon tribe and the human tribe. Centuries ago, these tribes fought over resources. As the conflict dragged on, both sides saw their numbers dwindling. It was the human tribe that first proposed the truce, and the demon tribe led by Isabella agreed to sign the peace treaty. She was hoping this treaty agreement will bring both tribes to a peace. The city on Earth was slowly sinking into the night, with a few lights glowing from apartment windows. In one apartment, loud cries echoed, urging All-Star to use everything and leave the rest to his buddy. On the computer desk, several convenience store packages and bottles of water lay scattered. A golden emblem, shaped like wings, flashed triumphantly on the screen. The guy, grinning, exclaimed that they had won. At that moment, the guy was in high spirits. His headphones buzzed with praise for his skills in computer games, with everyone around him commenting on how effortlessly he played. He took off his headphones reluctantly, deciding to take a short break from the game, muttering aloud that if he weren't stuck with mid to low level games, this would be a superior one. The guy who's the godlike player was named Xiangyi. His parents worked overseas, and he had almost no friends. All that remained of his parents were the photos hanging on the wall. The only things Xiangyi did during his free time were drawing or playing games late at night. For an entire summer, he cut ties with his acquaintances and retreated into solitude. He thought his summer would be just like any other, until he unexpectedly became the savior of another world. He had no clue what was happening. After hours of gaming, he dozed off at his desk. When he woke up, he didn't quite understand his surroundings. It didn't familiar to him, thinking why his ceiling looked so strange. But when his senses returned, he found a pretty girl with purple horns and white hair staring at him. Frightened, he asked who she was and why she was in his house. Instead of a polite response, she spat at him, calling him an idiot and telling him that he was no longer in his home. Rising from the floor where he had been sleeping, he looked around, wondering if this was just a hallucination caused by his gaming binge. But when he realized the hallucinations felt too real, he felt relief. In front of him stood 4 girls and an old woman in a purple cloak, holding a staff like a wizard. Xiangyi was somewhat reassured by their presence and their attire. The only logical thought he had was that he had somehow ended up in an isekai. Interrupting his thoughts, the girl with horns turned to the elderly woman, the high priestess, and asked if this was truly the one from the prophecy. The high priestess confirmed, stating that the chosen one would bear a ring similar to the queen's. Confused, Xiangyi didn't understand which ring they were talking about. He pulled out the ring hanging around his neck and asked if this was the one in question. He twirled the plain gold ring in his fingers, noting the red stone in the middle and the smaller red stones along the sides. The girl glanced at the ring Xiangyi was holding and confirmed it was the one. She then raised her hand to show her own ring, identical to his. In an angry rush, she grabbed him by his hoodie, demanding to know why she couldn't sense any magic from him if he was truly the chosen one. She accused him of being a member of the human race. Xiangyi, still bewildered, couldn't comprehend what the girl was talking about. He had bought the ring from a street corner shop in his town, so how could it be so significant? In a fit of frustration, the girl turned to the high priest, questioning how such a useless person as Xiangyi could even possess the ring. She asked if there was something wrong with the summoning spell. The high priest stood firm, claiming the spell had been correctly performed and that Xiangyi was the only one who could save the demon race from extinction. Xiangyi, overwhelmed by the nonsense in his ears, just wanted a simple explanation. The girl, calling him human garbage, introduced herself as Isabella Oase, the 7th ruler heir of a demon race. She explained that she had signed the peace treaty between demons and humans with her own hands. No one had ever imagined that High Commander Lillian and the humans would ever secretly agree on anything. Despite the long-standing conflict, men with vile methods attacked the queen when she was vulnerable. Lillian had somehow managed to extract a large amount of royal magic and survived, aided by her 4 guards who sacrificed their lives for her. Isabella stood before Xiangyi because of Queen Guard's sacrifice. Now, only a few could protect her from the threats looming ahead. Contemplating, Xiangyi realized this felt like one of those stories where he's transported to a fantasy world to save a fallen female protagonist. If the story is just that, then he would be the male protagonist. Moreover, it wouldn't be so bad for him if he could end up with a hottie like the demon queen. Snapping back to reality, he suggested Isabella hide in the mountains. But she scoffed, saying those dirty people would never let her escape. The other girls shouted in defiance, explaining that they had been harassed before, which led to them being surrounded here. In despair, the queen decided to trust the chosen one, though they never imagined he would turn out to be so useless. Feeling faint, Isabella was asked if she was alright. She managed to regain some composure before screaming in frustration. Her aura weakened, and her anger surged. Her eyes flashed with a sharpened tide. Then power erupted from her body, pushing everyone away from her. The dark purple color of the skin of her hands begins to fade away, leaving her resemble human hand, while her legs are under the same effect and her tail begin to disintegrating. Finally, only long slender human legs remain due to her demonic power depleted. The high priest and the other girls stood in shock as they watched her transformation. But Xiang Yi, both fearful and furious, muttered to himself. Watching the changes unfold, her form shrinking yet still retaining its formidable presence, Isabella stood frozen, shocked by the transformation of her once beautiful body into something more human-like. She couldn't understand why it had happened. The high priest explained that her aura had most likely been depleted, causing her form to shift. Isabella, worried about how she would present herself to her people, began to feel the weight of her situation. The other girls, tearful, lamented that the queen had used up her aura for their sake. In their frustration, they wanted to destroy Xiang Yi, blaming him for being useless. Xiang Yi, in disbelief, yelled that he was the victim and hadn't even wanted to be summoned to this world. But before they could continue their argument, the doors burst open, and a voice announced that the human race had almost broken through their defenses. A bloody man and a crow-faced creature urged Isabella to leave. The girls, determined, vowed to protect their queen at any cost. Isabella remarked that she was grateful to have such fighters by her side while putting Xiang Ye's clothes on. The high priest informed her that, given her current weakened state, it would be easier for her to escape, but she mustn't let the humans discover her true identity. She promised to stay behind to fend off the guards and buy her time. But Isabella refused to escape, shouting that she would never abandon her people, no matter what. The high priest pointed his staff at the floor, causing a blue glow light to form a massive magic circle beneath their feet. Isabella and her fighters prepared for what was to come. As the situation escalated, Isabella realized something was wrong and turned to the high priest, but her fighters insisted that she stay inside the circle for safety. Meanwhile, Xiang Yi tried to slip away, hoping to be sent back when the human race arrived. However, Isabella's fighters quickly noticed and blocked his escape. Desperate, Xiang Yi begged to be let go, and just let him live. And the high priest reassured Isabella that she had served 5 generations of rulers, and that this would be the last. She asked her to serve one more time as her 7th queen. Tears filled Isabella's eyes as she slowly stepped through the blue glowing magic. The high priest watched as everyone with her queen were vanished by teleporting in a flash. Relief, she stands firm, waiting for what coming her way. Suddenly, there was a massive explosion, and the blast blew open the doors. She paused, waiting for the dust to settle before turning to face the new threat. She turns and looks at the door. Standing in the doorway was Regent Tol's Angus, flanked by his army, all dressed in red and white. His first words were a demand to know where the queen was. The high priest, smiling, realized that things would not be so easily taken from her. Meanwhile, the group had been transported to a clearing deep in a forest, surrounded by coniferous trees. The blue magic spark out of nowhere emits the spark. They landed in the unfamiliar woods. The group surveyed their surroundings, the faint blue glow still enveloping them. Someone hesitantly questioned if they were still within human territory. Off in the distance, they spotted the castle they just escaped. One fighter tried to comfort Isabella, while another urged them to leave quickly. Isabella, however, assured them she wouldn't mourn now. Vengeance for their fallen warriors would take priority. As they deliberated, human soldiers spotted them from a hill. They rejoiced at finding demons in their midst. The group moved swiftly away from the castle, but a sudden arrow shot through the air, too quick for Isabella to react. It struck a fighter near Xiang, piercing her shoulder. Xiang cried out about the injury, but the wounded fighter calmly noted that the arrow was of human origin. Amid the chaos, others shouted for Isabella to flee, but she remained steadfast. The regent's army charged, shouting promises of gold for each demon's head. The injured fighters holding her pain turned to Xiang, with her dying wish for him to protect the queen. Stunned, he agreed without fully grasping the weight of her request. Suddenly, he grabbed Isabella's arm, urging her to leave. Stubborn, she's declaring she wouldn't abandon her fighters. Xiang Yi retorted that staying would mean certain death. He pulled her back as she screamed she'd rather die alongside her unit. But he firmly placed her on the ground, telling her that her survival was the only way to honor her warrior's sacrifice. Tears streamed down her face, but his words struck true. She reluctantly followed him, casting a final glance at her fighters, as the regent soldiers mocked their plight. The soldiers, emboldened, debated over who would claim their heads as trophies, jeering about leaving lifeless bodies behind. Isabella's heart broke at leaving her people. Yet Xiang held her hand firmly, ensuring her safety. Their escape was short-lived as a red-clad warrior appeared, sword resting on his shoulder. Furious that they dared resist, more soldiers surrounded them, observing their strange attire and debating whether they were demon slaves. However, another wonders if they should kill them or not. Isabella yanks her hand from Xiang's grasp, and charged at the soldier who insulted her tribe, shouting that they weren't warriors but animals with tears in her eyes. Her fist almost reached the face of one of Regent Tol's Angus's men. In the same instant, Xiang grabbed her and pulled her close, exclaiming with strained emotion that she was truly glad to see her people. One of the soldiers in the Red Dragon army began talking about how he'd heard that the demon race's slaves were being brainwashed into viewing humans as a threat. Another enthusiastically chimed in, wondering if they would be rewarded for bringing in their heads. A third added that if they were connected to the demon race, they should be destroyed immediately. Xiang Yi observed, noting how they didn't care that they were human and were willing to harm one of their own, grabbing Isabella's head. She didn't realize what was happening. He laughed hysterically, claiming they had misunderstood. He revealed her haunting by demons since childhood, causing deep trauma, leaving the soldiers bewildered. Xiang Yi continued, emphasizing that Isabella had endured much from the demon race and asked the soldiers to just let them go. But Isabella, tears in her eyes and fury in her heart, hissed at him. She vowed to destroy him for forcing the royalty to be on her knees. Xiang Yi whispered back, told her to stop talking about respect, especially when she couldn't defeat him in her current state. He urged her to suppress her ego if they wanted to survive, telling her that her only chance to avenge her people was to stay alive. Xiang Yi, tilting her head to the floor, addressed the soldier again, mocking him by saying that Isabella's trauma had made her feel like a queen. The soldier dismissed it, stating that he wasn't interested in their past, he just wanted to know if they had a bounty on their heads. Xiang Yi laughed briefly in response. The soldiers discussed how they would share the reward, deciding that whoever killed them first would claim it. Xiang Yi tried once more to persuade them to let them go. But one of the fighters, eyes bloodthirsty, drew his sword. Suddenly, a voice shouted for them to stop. The soldiers turned in shock. As a knight on horseback is leading a large army approached them. The soldier couldn't believe his eyes. A white flag bearing a dragon's image rose above the army. They quickly realized that the newcomers weren't part of their army, but from the White Dragon army. The soldiers stood motionless as the White Dragon army moved closer, while Isabella and Xiang Yi were still stuck to the ground. The three soldiers above them asked if they were there to provide support. The knight on the white horse, dressed in white robes with gold and blue accents, said he had heard everything the soldier had said and ordered them to leave and find their leader. Hill pretended that nothing had happened, telling the soldiers to leave. The excited soldier argued that the White Dragon army didn't hold as much power, calling them a copy of the Red Dragon army. The knight calmly replied that he was in charge of the White Dragon army and that the soldier had less authority over him. The knight in white armor, Cephesus, coldly informed the soldiers that it didn't matter that they were in the army, he had permission to execute them all. With a swift motion, he raised his sword to the soldier's face, ordering them to leave immediately. Only Isabella, Xiang Yi, and Cephesus remained in the clearing. Xiang Yi whispered to Isabella, expressing concern that things had worsened with the arrival of a stronger force. Cephesus dismounted his horse and approached them, introducing himself as the head of the White Dragon Knights. He then asked when Isabella and Xiang Yi had been captured by demons and turned into slaves. Xiang Yi, unbothered, retorted that it was a relief to see Cephesus and if he came a bit later, he might as well say goodbye to his life. Cephesus, unimpressed, pointed his weapon directly at Xiang Yi's face. Demanding an answer, he ordered him to be direct, or else he'll losing his life on the spot. Isabella, unable to contain her anger, dared Cephesus to destroy them without delay, while Xiang Yi, horrified, shouted at her to hold her tongue. Xiang Yi suppressed his thoughts, aware that a single misstep could be deadly, and began recounting his capture, estimating it to be 5 or 6 years ago. Cephesus, stunned, dumbfounded, was speechless. He asked what their roles had been in the demon race. Xiang Yi, startled, thought he had no role in the demon race, just a gamer without a backstory. He claimed to be an assistant cook and gestured to Isabella, calling her his wife, also enslaved by demons. Cephesus looked from Xiang Yi to Isabella, clearly surprised. Xiang Yi secretly celebrated, thinking that Cephesus had bought their story. He confirmed aloud that it was true. However, Cephesus asked again, this time about why Xiang Yi was walking around naked. Xiang Yi froze, realizing that he had given his clothes to Isabella. He couldn't explain it aloud. Cephesus, seemingly unfazed, tugged at the base of his dazzling white cape. Xiang Yi, confused, watched him as he removed the robe and draped it over Xiang Yi's shoulders. Cephesus assumed that they had taken his clothes, as prisoners often tried to escape without them. Xiang Yi couldn't help but think how gentle the knight seemed, despite the situation. As Cephesus continued, he offered to take them home. Isabella, furious, yelled at him about where he planned to take them. Xiang Yi, bewildered, silenced her with a hand over her mouth as a white dragon soldier called out to Cephesus, informing him that the red and black dragon armies had withdrawn their troops. Cephesus simply remarked that it seemed like he was late to the party. Isabella, not content with the situation, grabbed Xiang Yi's hand and threatened him, warning him that if he belittled her again, she would make his life a nightmare. Xiang Yi quickly told her to keep quiet, stressing that the last thing he wanted was for them to be exposed. Isabella, determined, insisted that if she returned to the human race, she would never go back to the demon realm. Xiang Yi called her an idiot, pointing out that if they were sent to another world right now, she might forget about returning at all. His final words to her were to listen and not expose herself. Cephesus turned to the soldier, and, sensing no further need for intervention, told him he could go home. He then motioned for Xiang Yi and Isabella to follow him. Isabella was displeased, but Xiang Yi raised his fist and declared that victory would belong to the White Dragon Knights. The White Dragon army marched in columns towards a massive stone castle, and Xiang Yi and Isabella rode on the same horse. Xiang Yi, from behind her, wondered aloud if there were really humans living in this place, noting the towering walls. Isabella snorted, telling him not to hold on to her so tightly. He responded that it was his first time riding a horse, and he felt uncomfortable. They arrived at the capital, located in the southern part of the mainland. The city, well positioned for all 4 seasons, was rich in resources. The Great Wall, called Air's Wall, was equipped with powerful cannons for protection, and it also protected by high-level sorcerers ensured its defense. As they passed through the city gates, the army followed them down a cobblestone street. Xiang Yi surveyed everything around him and noticed that the people here dressed very differently from the demon race. When they saw the knights, they bowed respectfully. A knight of the White Dragon army shouted out if Xiang Yi and Isabella were there. They were introduced, and the knight acknowledged their presence. Xiang Yi thought to himself that they couldn't allow anyone to discover Isabella's real identity. The knight, eyeing their names, suggested they might have been changed. Xiang Yi, reflecting that his father had given him his name, confirmed aloud that their names had indeed been changed. The knight then asked if they remembered their previous names. Xiang Yi, not remembering anything from before their capture, answered that he didn't. The soldier ahead of the knight seemed taken aback. The captain, noticing their confusion, turned to the soldier, disappointed, as they approached the royal family of Toll's Storm. The knights, clad in golden armor with red accents, stood at attention. And the most important figure among them, smiling broadly, stood at the forefront is the royal family Toll's Burai. Cephisas ordered his soldiers to keep them on their horses and returned to the royal palace. Xiang Yi, still processing everything, asked Isabella who the man was who had blocked the knight's way. Isabella replied that, judging by his attire, he was from the royal family. Xiang Yi, momentarily distracted, loudly exclaimed that the man seemed a bit out of place for someone in the royal family. A soldier shushed him, warning him to be quiet, as the man was the first child of the regent. Xiang Yi was surprised, asking if that meant the regent's first child was above the leader of the group, to which the soldier affirmed. The soldier explained that the regent's first child was superior, and the current regent commanded the strongest cavalry, making him one of the most powerful figures. He also revealed that the current king was still very young, and the regent had been tasked with supporting him after the previous ruler's passing. Isabella, unable to hold back, claimed the regent's son was nothing special and that he wouldn't stand a chance if her magic hadn't been lost. The soldier warned that they'd lose their heads if she kept speaking nonsense, while Xiang Yi threatened to smack her if she said anything else. As they reached the palace, Cephisas dismounted and bowed before the royal representative, greeting him. Toll's Burai, clearly mistaken, thought that his father had returned with the White Dragon army, not realizing that it was just a group with their leader. Cephisas, ever charming, suggested that he had even arranged a welcome party, complete with flower girls. The regent, surprised, was left confused by this statement. Cephisas explained that His Majesty had sent a team to negotiate with the demon race. However, they arrived one step ahead of the agreement signing. Burai explained that the king had a different idea than just killing the demon queen. With his wild eyes, questioned if the White Dragon Knight was challenging the king's decisions. Uncertain, he muttered just, but was interrupted by another figure sarcastically questioning if these were truly the king's decisions or the regent's intentions. At that moment, a figure stepped forward, none other than Cephisas' father, who looked remarkably similar to him. Cephisas looked at him and exclaimed father. His father, the imperial leader Giro Dida. Toll's Burai immediately turned to him, asking if he should accompany His Majesty for today, which he responded that he had heard the triumphant news about the regent and had decided to greet him personally. Burai, sensing the tension, asked if Cephisas' father had come to question the regent, to which he laughed and assured him he would never dare to do that. Xiang Yi, observing the scene, asked aloud if it was possible that the group leader's father played a major role in this empire. A soldier answered that Master Giro was the only imperial leader, close to both the regent and the king. Yet he and the regent had differing political views, often clashing over them. Isabella dismissed them as useless people who argued endlessly. However, Xiang Yi sarcastically thought that she had never been betrayed by her own kin before. Meanwhile, soldiers atop the wall began blowing horns, signaling the gates opening. Burai began talking about the gate opening, and it seemed like the regent was involved. Xiang Yi, confused, questioned why they hadn't heard the same sound when they arrived, to which the soldier explained it was because they were with the White Dragon group. Turning around, they saw soldiers holding flags at the gate. Xiang Yi and Isabella faced the gate and watched the entire procession unfold. Isabella, horrified by the sight, froze in shock. A knight on horseback appeared, holding someone's head on his lance. Her mind went blank as tears welled in her eyes, but she remained rooted in place. Xiang Yi's hand rested on her shoulder, urging her to stay where she was. Though shaking with anger, she listened to him, clenching her teeth tightly. Her hands are trembling in anger. Xiang Yi, filled with a storm of emotions and curiosity, turned his gaze to the imposing figure moving forward, an enormous knight in all red riding on his horse. This figure is none other than Toll's Angus the Regent and the leader of the Red Dragon army. Isabella recognized him immediately as Toll's Angus and swore vengeance, promising to make him pay in blood. Toll's Angus halted his horse before Mr. Guro, and greeting him warmly. Soon, Mr. Guro's expression changed, and he stated that, unfortunately, Toll's Angus couldn't rest yet. He expressed a desire to meet with the Royal Highness, and they would go together. Toll's Angus, pleased, was about to report to the Royal Highness, when Burai runs to his father and to says something. Irritated, Toll's Angus interrupts him by saying his name, and the man is scared to death. His father warns him not to play a game like this again, otherwise his father will him. Intimidating, Toll's Angus looks at him and commands him to leave. Burai, dumbfounded and unable to stand up to his father, simply acknowledged his command. Xian Yi and Isabella observed the interaction, and Xian Yi turned to her, asking if the man she wanted to destroy was a warlord. Isabella was confused, not understanding what he meant. She explained that, in their time, they referred to this warlord as Kao, a man who pushed people toward their desires, with his son eventually becoming king. Xian Yi dismissed her words, suggesting they focus on getting her out of there. To which she snapped back, thinking he just wanted to be rid of her. Before they could continue bickering, a soldier called their attention, stating he had been assigned to escort them to Master Guro's residence. Xian Yi smiled and agreed, while Isabella remained lost in thought. Not long after, they arrived at the residence, a grand building opening before them. Xian Yi, impressed, remarked on its vastness, wondering what kind of privileges the group leader had. Isabella shook her head, indicating they hadn't seen anything yet. Inside, the golden decorations dazzled them, with a statue standing in the center. Xian Yi thought the place resembled a museum. A girl appeared behind them, introducing herself as Elena, the housekeeper. She mentioned that she and the other girls were assigned to take care of them. Xian Yi, amazed by the beautiful women, couldn't help but marvel at the fact that they had female butlers. The housekeeper, Elena, was polite and suggested they were likely hungry and tired. Xian Yi eagerly exclaimed that he was indeed very hungry, while Isabella, cautious, questioned the strange kindness they were receiving, wondering if it was normal for slaves to be treated so well. Xian Yi replied that if they meant to harm them, they would have done so already. He advised they just go with the flow, to which Isabella reluctantly agreed. The two began to follow her down the grand hall, moving in the opposite direction of the servants. Elena, standing behind them, had dark thoughts brewing in her mind. Meanwhile, in the Great Hall, Master Guro and Toll's Angus approached His Majesty, who was sitting on a red carpet. His Majesty praised their success, calling them the city's best warriors, and asked what reward they sought after the Demon Queen negotiations. Toll's Angus expressed gratitude, stating that fulfilling His Highness's wishes and sharing his responsibilities was reward enough. He argued that sharing responsibilities and fulfilling wishes couldn't excuse the regent's actions, which were a grave offense. Mr. Guro informed His Majesty that the contract signed with the demon race had led to a truce. He also mentioned that the White Dragon Group had been sent to represent them. He added that the regent had rushed to send the Demon Queen to the other world, a move that had tarnished His Majesty's name and could lead to more serious consequences. If the missing queen returned to the demon people, it could spark a full-scale war. Cephisas, who was present, thought about how the clash between the two nations could lead to the destruction of both their people. His Majesty responded to his mentor, suggesting that Cephisas might have other motives for being so concerned. Toll's Angus then asked for permission to provide a full account of the events after the nations signed the truce treaty. His Majesty received a letter from Lillian, the Demon Queen's right hand. The letter stated that Lillian had gained significant support from her own people, and offered to help overthrow Queen Isabella, promising to lead the demon nation and strengthen relations with the kingdom. Toll's Angus responded, saying that the people had already accepted Queen Isabella as their new ruler. Mr. Guro, deep in thought, recalled that the previous queen, Isabella, had been reported missing after the battle, which could lead to the termination of the treaty. Toll's Angus mentioned their agreement with Lillian, clearly outlined in the contract, and passed it on for His Majesty's review. His Majesty opened the envelope containing the contract. After finished read it, he was surprised and marveled at the success, praising Toll's Angus that he'd done so well for the kingdom's progress. However, Master Guro voiced his concerns, questioning how a traitor like Lillian could have so easily overthrown the Osa clan and become the new queen. His Majesty interrupted, stating that there was no point in dwelling on the matter, and that he would allow the regent to do whatever he wanted. Master Guro, taken aback by this response, simply acknowledged it. Toll's Angus, along with his subjects, was delighted to hear His Majesty's decision. Cephisas, standing behind his father, looked clearly displeased with how easily his father had been swayed. Meanwhile, steam rose from the hot water as it filled the enormous pool. Contemplating, Isabella considered returning to her people but quickly realized they wouldn't recognize her as their queen. The idea of living out the rest of her life as one of human troubled her. Xian Yi, meanwhile, relaxed in the hot water, briefly enjoying the peace. However, he was soon overwhelmed with thoughts. It wasn't the time to relax. He longed to return home, staring at the ring in his hand. He wondered if it had brought him here, could it take him back? He had no intention of spending his life in a world he didn't understand. His mind kept returning to the people he saw sent to the other world. and the unease that stirred within him. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away for now, and decided to keep the ring close by wearing it. As he fumbled with the ring, struggling to put it on his finger, someone quietly approached him. While he trying to put the ring on, Cephesus called out to Xiangyi, who silently noted the ring could only fit on his ring finger, which he replies the captain's return with a tone that blended relief and formality. When turning back, he was startled to see a completely naked man in front of him. Seeing that, the captain casually standing firm, Cephesus, standing behind, suggested they bath together. Xiangyi was taken aback by the sight of the naked body and couldn't help but be surprised. Cephesus entered the pool and positioned himself not far from Xiangyi, though Xiangyi didn't want to be near him. Isabella's words about the slaves being treated too well echoed in his mind, and he realized she was right. This man was cunning. Cephesus began washing himself, and Xiangyi couldn't help but wonder if the scars on his body were from the battlefield. He continued to observe, questioning whether he was being too optimistic in his assumptions. Cephesus broke the silence, asking if Xiangyi had gotten used to the place. It dawned on Xiangyi that the night was testing him. He quickly assured Cephesus that everything was fine. Cephesus then mentioned that tomorrow he would send people to search for their real family. Xiangyi was surprised, unsure if Cephesus truly meant to help them. Cephesus confirmed, but noted that the information they had was minimal. Xiangyi thought that if someone was actually found based on their stories, he would be very surprised. Cephesus asked if Xiangyi remembered any of his relatives. Xiangyi, who had suffered a concussion after a fall, thought that Cephesus might be trying to catch him in a lie. He kept his response vague, saying his memories were unclear. Cephesus mentioned that he also had a younger brother, Sisak, who was around Xiangyi's age and had been captured by demons. He hadn't seen him since then and asked if Xiangyi had ever met him. Xiangyi's mind raced, unsure of how to answer. But he eventually replied simply that there were many slaves like him, and he couldn't remember them all. Cephesus pressed on with his questions, asking what typically happened to people who were captured. Xiangyi explained that being a slave meant regular beatings and abuse, and that he had grown up in a kitchen with spoons and forks. He wondered if he had answered correctly, but Cephesus's thoughts remained unreadable. Xiangyi's mind turned to the thought that if they were being treated so well here, maybe they would have information about his little brother. Cephesus stood up in the pool, saying that all he could hope for was that Sisak was still alive. Hope was the only thing that kept him going, the only chance for them to reunite. Xiangyi admitted that being a slave was rough but praised the food, playfully suggesting Sisak might have become a strong man, all while hoping his words would lift Cephesus's spirits. However, Cephesus only replied that once the peace treaty was signed, they could ask for the release of all human captives. Xiangyi asked if they had only attacked their people and whether there was any liberty in executing all the slaves. Cephesus explained that the demon tribe now had a new ruler, and Xiangyi was stunned and he couldn't believe it. Cephesus clarified that the two nations had already reached a peace agreement, and Xiangyi's thoughts turned to the traitor who had become the new ruler. He realized that Isabella needed to be informed immediately. Cephesus also revealed that the regent was now the only one who could negotiate with the demons. Xiangyi, with a sudden burst of honesty, pointed out that the regent and Cephesus's father disagreed on many things, making it difficult for Cephesus to get help from the regent. Cephesus could only agree, acknowledging that the boy was right. His father, the king's mentor, remained silent because he was a subordinate, but if not, the regent would likely destroy him. Cephesus added that the regent had no reason to help him, as he was only trying to make allies with his enemies. Xiangyi rubbed his chin, reflecting that the situation was quite complicated. But Cephesus remained resolute, insisting that he couldn't let any of this stop him. Xiangyi, filled with optimism, said that good things would come his way, and that he would surely be reunited with his lost brother. Cephesus placed his hand on Xiangyi's shoulder, a bit confused by the gesture. The captain thanked him for his encouraging words, and said that in the future, he didn't have to call him team leader or captain, just Cephesus is enough. Xiangyi was taken aback and, with a hint of embarrassment, simply acknowledged it. As night began to fall over the city, Xiangyi walked the spacious hallways after leaving the pool, accompanied by the housekeeper, Elena. All he could think about was how Isabella had been right. Cephesus had something to hide. His thoughts were interrupted when Elena turned to him and informed him that this would be his room. He thanked her, calling her sister's servant, and she wished him a restful night before quickly moving away. As she walked, Xiangyi couldn't help but admire her beauty, imagining what it would be like if she were his girlfriend. He opened the door, and to his shock, Isabella appeared in front of him. She had her head covered, completely naked. Xiangyi froze, too stunned to speak at first. All he could ask was what she was doing in his room with his noses bleeding. Isabella blushed in embarrassment, hurriedly dressing herself, and rushing to the door to close it, desperate to hide herself from view. With the door shut, she spat in his face in fury, calling him an idiot. She ordered him to stop using her real name, as they were being watched. Xiangyi, still in disbelief, protested, saying it couldn't be true, not after having just spoken with Cephesus. But Isabella yells at him, it wasn't Cephesus that she's talking about. It was the maids watching them from nearby. Despite the luxurious surroundings, they were still slaves to demons and could never fully trust them. Xianyi tried to dismiss her concerns. However, Isabella shows him the ring, blaming him for telling the squad leader that they were married. Xianyi wondered if they were placed in the same room as a test to prove their marriage. Isabella worried that if their lies were exposed, they would surely be suspected of ties to the demon tribe. She stopped abruptly, and listening intently with focus, exclaiming, "There's Omion was outside." Outside the room, Elin stand firmly, intended to spy on them. She had been eavesdropping with her ear pressed to the door. After hearing just enough of the couple pretended sweet moment, her face blushing red, she smiled softly, probably bought their story, or something naughty in her mind, I wonder. Then she walked and left the couple, leaving Isabella to wonder if it truly was enough while Xianyi is still playful pretending. Isabella, still seething, glared at him, warning that if he do this stunt again, she would destroy him. Xianyi, unfazed, suggested they could end their arrangement for real if she wasn't happy. Isabella's anger simmered down as she realized she couldn't maintain it. But the moment she felt vulnerable, she slapped him across the face. She declared that he would sleep on the floor tonight, while she claimed the bed, warning that if he did anything while she was asleep, she'd make sure he was erased from this world. Xianyi, with a smirk, teased that she looked more like a tigress without fangs. She retorted that if he had the courage, he could try something. But Xianyi just shrugged, saying he wasn't that kind of person. As she lay on the bed, he settled onto the floor, wondering how she had summoned him here, and if she could send him back to his world. She waved her hand, saying she didn't know any spells like that, and even the high priest couldn't send him back. Xianyi sighed, his frustration growing at the hopelessness of the situation. Realizing he still had the gold ring, he asked Isabella to lend him hers for a moment. She removed it and handed it to him, letting him try his idea. He hoped that if the ring had brought him here, it should be able to send him back. He told her to move aside and began chanting, holding his hands together in front of him, desperately trying to get the ring to work. After several minutes of repeating the same words, it became clear that nothing was happening. He shouted in frustration, realizing it wasn't working at all. He blamed the priest for cursing him when he summoned him, but Isabella explained that the priest had used an old spell, one only the elders of their people could read. Xianyi was stunned by this revelation and understood that he could only return once he was back in the demon lands. He stared at the rings in confusion, then told her to take the ring back, though she hadn't heard him. When he called out again, he noticed she had already fallen asleep. Her face relaxed, her eyelids drooping peacefully as she slept, and Xianyi thought this was her true face. Despite her aggressive nature, she looked cute in her sleep. Meanwhile, across the castle, a light burned in another room. Safisa stood at the window, looking out at the city as the night deepened. Suddenly, the housekeeper approached from behind and called out to him. He turned and asked if she had been spying on them that day. She blushed and admitted she had, but justified it by saying they had just come from the demon nation. Without a word, he pulled her toward him by her slim waist, pressing her against his bare torso, and told her not to interfere with them again without his permission. She was flustered and didn't realize it was the first time he had brought guests to his home. He explained that he felt an unnatural connection to Xianyi, as if he were family. Memories of his younger brother, wearing red robes and playing on the lawn, flooded his mind. He wondered if Xianyi could really be his long-lost brother, Safasak. His train of thought was interrupted by Elena's hand, and she said she hadn't seen her master smile in a long time. He turned to her and asked if she was happy for him. She blushed again, standing there, gazing at him with loving eyes. The next moment, she was on his bed, and he asked her to stay the night. She lay back, looking at him with feline eyes, unable to answer. Sofas hovered over her, then they shared a kiss, with a sweet moment together. As the sun began to rise, they sought privacy, while in another part of the castle, Xianyi lay sleeping, unaware that the first light of day was beginning to shine through his window. He opened his eye, and rising from the blanket he had spread on the floor, he rubbed the back of his head, glancing over at the bed where Isabella had peacefully slept the night before. He noticed the Isabella's bed but didn't realize where she had disappeared to, wondering where she could be. Just then, his name was called, and as he turned, he stood with a bare torso, greeting Elena, the sister's servant. She smiled, holding clothes in her hands, and wished him good morning. As he began to put on the clothes, Elena mentioned that the master himself had chosen the outfit specifically for him. As he finished dressing, Elena said it suited him well. He looked at himself in the mirror, his gloved cloak and black pants, thinking that this was the typical attire in this world. Turning to Elena, he asked if she knew where Isabella had gone. She replied that Miss Isabella and the master were practicing in the garden, and that he could join them if he wished. Following her through the castle, she led him out into a vast courtyard adorned with large statues. He marveled at the scale of the garden, realizing that if he hadn't been brought here, he would likely be lost by now. Suddenly, Safisas heard his voice and recognized it as belonging to Xianyi, calling out to him. He standing with a large bow, aiming for the target Pratis with his attire matching his precision. Concentrating, he focusedly aimed at the target. Then he released the arrow, hitting the bullseye, with the other 2 arrows landing in the same spot. Xiang Yi ran up to him, praising his accuracy, and suggesting he must have an impressive track record to achieve such precision, which made him nervous. Safisas offered him a shot, but the guy politely declined, claiming he wasn't as talented a marksman as him. Safisas remarked on Ibei's impressive talent with a thoughtful tone while shifted his gaze to her. Isabella or Ibei, her cover name, who was standing nearby, also aiming her bow at the target. Focusing her aim with concentration, she released her arrow, and hitting the center just like Safisas. Xiang Yi watched her, realizing that her powers might be waning, but her skills were still intact. He recalled telling her she couldn't take anyone in her form. Then he mentally cursed himself for saying such foolish words. At that moment, Elena approached them and informed them that breakfast was ready. The table was filled with cakes, candy, donuts, and freshly brewed coffee. Safisas commented that they had been living with the demon people for so long now, they had grown accustomed to their way of life. Isabella quietly sipped her coffee, and Xiang Yi, looking satisfied, saying he'd get used to it just fine. Furthermore, he resolved to find a way to leave while expressing gratitude, assuring they couldn't be a bother any longer. After wiping his mouth with a napkin, Safisas reassured them they were welcome to stay as long as they needed. Moreover, he had already assigned Elena to them, who would help them adjust their life to live comfortably in the kingdom. Xiang Yi smiled, wondering to himself if Safisas really thought they would stay here forever. He stared at the housekeeper and Safisas intently, contemplating the possibilities. But just as his thoughts drifted, he was pulled from them. Isabella stated that they just wanted the freedom to live on their own again, and they didn't want to bring him any more problems. He folded his hands in front of him, assuring her it was no problem. In fact, if they were looking to make a living in the kingdom, he can organize some work for them. However, if they truly wanted to stay and work there and work, it would be fine too. He also expressed a desire to try Xiang Ye's cooking. He smiled at the thought, secretly amused by how quickly he had bent to the idea. Unable to tolerate it any longer, Isabella shouted that she'd had enough. She stood up, declaring she'd rather return to demon territory than work in the kitchen for the rest of her life. Xiang Yi tried to calm her down, telling her to stop provoking him. At that moment, he asked what Xiang Yi and Isabella were talking about. Isabella, still fuming, explained that she had heard about how humans were treated in the kingdom from the demon tribe. Legends said that in the past, humans were wiped out because of their fragile bodies, often targeted due to constant aggression. The humans, in search of protection, sought a dragon to watch over them. The dragon helped them build settlements, cities, and even taught them magic. Over time, dragons became symbols of humans because of all they had done. The king has 7 armies, each of them has a different color of the original dragon emblem. The black and red dragon armies lead, the purple, teal, amber, and ash guard the walls, while the white dragon serves as the king's personal cavalry. If a man wanted to escape poverty, the best solution was to join the army. There were only 2 ways to get into the army. The first was through hard training, proving one's worth, and the second was by obtaining a diploma from the honored school in the capital. The honored school, established years ago, had produced many distinguished alumni who went on to serve the kingdom. The headmaster, Vasily Andrei, was over 500 years old and had achieved divine-level spells. The teachers were said to be capable of commanding thousands of armed troops. Isabella, fired up, told him she wanted to be a student within the honored school. It doesn't matter if she has to study swordsmanship or magic, as her only desire was to become stronger. Xiang Yi grimaced, realizing this might be the only way to reach the demon realm. Safisas turned to her, asking if she was sure of her decision. Isabella shouted a phrase she hadn't meant to say aloud. She wanted revenge. Safisas, confused, asked who she sought revenge against and why. Xiang Yi, sensing the rising tension, knew things were getting heated, and they could be in danger. He confirmed her words, stating that they wanted revenge because they had been oppressed by the demons for too long, and the only way to do that was through training to destroy them. He shouted a chant, declaring this was the only way they could save millions of prisoners. However, Safisas said that if revenge was their only motivation, he wouldn't let them go to the school. Xiang Yi was taken aback by Safisas' statement, wondering why it was impossible. Safisas left, explaining that fighting wasn't as easy as it seemed, and that Xiang Yi should stay behind, while he would find his family. Xiang Yi called out to him, asking him to reconsider, and explained that he had another reason for wanting to go. Safisas turned around, curious about what that reason might be. Xiang Yi boldly declared that they were weak right now, but if they enrolled in the school, they could grow stronger and help him. He spoke of his father and Regent fighting for the human race, and how they, too, wanted to contribute. It was the only way they could truly repay him for everything he had done. Isabella looked at him, seeing him as a weakling who spoke too much. Xiang Yi realized that he had exhausted all the words he could use to influence Safisas' decision. Safisas looked at him intently, and placed his hands on his shoulders, stating that he hadn't realized how much he cared. He continued to stare at Xiang Yi as if considering his words. and Xiang Yi felt that Sophisa's had finally bought into his nonsense and clearly lost his mind during their conversation. Isabella, standing behind Xiang Yi, called out to reminding Sophisa's that they didn't belong to the nobility or even ordinary citizens. Their only hope of getting into the school was through him. Sophisa's, acknowledging Isabella's potential, agreed to enroll her in the school. He believed she had great potential and, with study, would make a huge contribution to the country. However, Xiang Yi is still far off from the honored school enrollment. Isabella remarked that the leader had a keen eye for soldiers, and if Sophisa's looked closely, he'd see Xiang Yi's potential. Sophisa's patted Xiang Yi's shoulder, making a joke about Xiang Yi's culinary prowess, which Xiang Yi thought was a poor comparison. Although, Xiang Yi couldn't even cook properly. At that moment, the sun was shining brightly over the castle, and the day had just begun. Xiang Yi and Isabella, along with Sophisa's, and a large army of soldiers, stood ready. Sophisa's explained that it had been 2 months since the start of the school year, so the couple can be only enrolled as late insert students. Xiang Yi, overjoyed, thought it meant they would learn swordsmanship and magic. Sophisa's clarified that swordsmanship and magic were just 2 of the 9 faculties of the academy. The main departments included magic, fencing, close combat, and archery. Xiang Yi would have to demonstrate all his skills in front of the teachers from the 9 faculties, who would analyze him and assign him to a suitable department. Xiang Yi felt uncertain, as all he knew how to do was play video games and draw. Sophisa's reassured him that the teachers used a special testing method, and as long as a soldier had determination, they could achieve anything. Even if they didn't know how, Sophisa's order Akil, the soldier would show him the way to his guidance teacher. Xiang Yi glanced at the soldier who had accompanied them, realizing he was an assistant. In the next moment, Sophisa's jumped onto his horse, and Xiang Yi called out, asking if Sophisa's would accompany them to meet the teachers. Sophisa's replied that he had to visit His Highness with his father today. If they passed the test, the teachers would arrange accommodations for them at the academy. If Xiang Yi didn't pass the test, Sophisa's would pick him up and take him back home. Isabella hissed about him being human scum, causing the soldier to laugh loudly. Xiang Yi strongly disliked the comment. But after a few minutes, they arrived at the Honorable Academy. He gazed at the massive building, as large as the one they lived in, and realized this was his first test in this world. They walked onto the academy grounds, surrounded by stone buildings and statues. A large crowd of people sat on the floor, waiting for their turn to be taught by the oldie that will teach them how to master the Fist of Wind. An old man, Mike Yeso, introduced himself as the Academy of Close Combat's teacher, and explained that mastering the power of shadow was the first step. He called on a student named Eli, instructing him to demonstrate for everyone. Then the teacher threw a rock at Eli, who caught it with his bandaged hand. The rock was small, about the size of a coin. Without hesitation, Mike ordered him to strike the statue behind him with all his might. Acknowledged him, Eli clenched the stone in his fist. The man cocked his fist, with a sharp eye. His punch hit the statue, sending a massive dust cloud into the air, and a glowing red dent appeared in the pedestal, and smoke came out of it with the cracking sound of the statue. The crowd cheered, impressed by his strength, and everyone realized Eli was the one who had delivered the blow. Mike then instructed Eli to unclench his fist, revealing a small pile of dust in his hand. He commented that Eli's punch was so powerful it destroyed the rock, but to master the shadow strength, Eli needed to learn not to break whatever he held. The crowd murmured in confusion, wondering how that was possible. Eli spread his hands, bewildered, and turned to the teacher, expressing how impossible it seemed. Mike pulled a yellow bird from a golden cage, and held it in his fist, then walked across the stage. He then walks to the statue with the bird in his hand. Without hesitation, Mike cocked his hand. He struck the same statue with the bird in his hand. The impact caused a shockwave and an explosion of dust, far more intense than Eli's punch. The force of the blow was so powerful that Eli had to shield himself with his hands, and everyone else was thrown back, caught in the massive dust cloud. As the cloud cleared, the statue had been reduced to a pile of rocks. Amid the dust, a familiar small figure appeared, Mike Yeso, standing with his hand open, revealing the yellow bird. Astonishingly, the bird, alive and unharmed, it flew away swiftly. The crowd was shocked, and Eli, still in disbelief, could only ask how Mike had managed to do it. Suddenly, someone on the sidelines shouted, praising how cool it was to see an ordinary man destroy the statue with a single blow. Mike looked at Isabella, Xiang Yi, and the soldier who had brought them and asked what they were here for. The soldier quickly apologized for interrupting the lesson, and introduced the new students, explaining that they had come for an entrance test. Mike turned to Xiang Yi, asking if he was the new student. The students exclaimed in surprise, marveling at her beauty and questioning if she intended to enroll, noting that girls rarely joined the course. Will Xiang Yi nods his head cheerfully, replying the teacher. But suddenly the teacher growled, his face contorting into an angry expression. The rage in his eyes flared, emitting an unprecedented green glow. The crowd was shocked, and even the soldier nearby looked horrified, clearly uncomfortable being so close. The intensity of teacher's wrath unsettled everyone, even those off stage. Isabella remained unfazed, not understanding what was happening. Eli, despite being the strongest of the class, was also frightened. The 5 of them stood still on stage, not moving, exchanging silent glances. The students murmured about the power that teacher had unleashed, confused by where it came from, since he had barely shown any power earlier in the year. But something caught the attention of the old man. At that moment, teacher's attention shifted to Isabella, who suggested they go to the magic and swordsmanship teacher. Mike then called out to Isabella, addressed as little girl, telling her she would be an excellent student for close combat. She apologized, explaining that she wanted to study magic and swordsmanship. Mike sighed, covering his eyes before opening them again, and turning his gaze to Xiangyi. He remarked that Xiangyi seemed fit for close combat as well. Xiangyi, though, couldn't stop thinking about how he might not be able to stand after facing Mike's abilities. The soldier, placing a hand on Xiangyi's shoulder, remarked that it seemed like he had withstood the teacher's intimidating power. Xiangyi slowly backed away, feeling the weight of the situation. The soldier lay down on the floor, while Isabella called Xiangyi weak. The bright sun was high in the sky, now around noon. Xiangyi, eyes closed. Suddenly, he opened them, startled by something. He sat up and yelled at the soldier, asking what had just happened, and where everyone had gone, while Isabella, addressing him coldly, explained that everyone had already left. Eli watched Xiangyi and explained that he was paralyzed by the intimidating power of Teacher Mike. Xiangyi, still puzzled, admitted that Mike was very strong and he didn't understand how he did it. Eli was surprised by the question, pointing out that Xiangyi hadn't passed the test but offered to tutor him. Xiangyi grinned, admitting he wasn't used to injuries and was glad he failed, thinking the grueling workouts would have killed him. He nodded, telling Eli they could still be friends. Eli, surprised by the word friends, extended his hand. From today, he was also the student at the academy. RMC introduced himself as Xiangyi, and Eli will be his first friend that he made since he had joined. Xiangyi figured Eli looked so strong to avoid bullying him, so befriending him seemed like the safest bet. And Eli introduced himself as Alex Air, saying that if they were friends, Xiangyi could just call him Air. Before leaving, Alex invited him to the martial arts class, but Isabella remarked Xiangyi lacked talent and only excelled at making friends. Xiangyi shouted back, protesting that he wasn't just persuading her to be his friend. Isabella, arms folded, stood silent, as the soldier politely suggested they could try magic and swordsmanship classes instead of close combat. They left the stage and made their way to the training ground, an open-air area with stone walls and a red roof. Shouts filled the air as fighters yelled at each other, and swords clanged in the ring. Some used magic, while others defended with their swords. In one corner, a girl wielding magic pushed back another girl with a sword. The magic-wielding girl created a protective dome around herself as she hovered slightly off the ground. The sword-wielding girl addresses her as AC and told her to calm down. AC was also a teacher, sitting on her magic dome, and teased the other girl for being funny. AC scolded the girl, Dorona, saying that her fencing lessons were taking up the entire field, preventing her students from practicing. In retaliation, AC fired a blast of green magic at Dorona, but the beam hit the ground instead. Dorona managed to jump out of the way, and scolded AC for attacking her without warning. The crowd of students cheered, encouraging their teacher to keep going. In the midst of the chaos, the red-haired son of the regent shouted for something more real, urging the teacher to show the full intensity of their fencing class. Students from the magic class yelled in frustration, complaining about their practice fields being taken up by the sword fighters. A more mature-looking guy, holding a book, agreed with them. Just then, someone with the broom is cleaning the area, asking them to stop fighting. An elderly man with a white beard approached the ring, holding his broom. He asked if they could stop the fight, explaining that he had just cleaned the area, and it was already dirty again. But AC and Dorona didn't stop, continuing their battle for the field, until Dorona got hit on his shoulder by AC's spell. And the smoke can be seen. Dorona raised her sword in preparation for another strike. Dorona declared she'd join in if that's how AC wanted to play, with a defiant grin. Dorona jumped into the air, ready to counter. In the heat of battle, Dorona drew her sword just as AC released a magic ball. When Dorona was close, AC formed a green shield in front of her. But then something felt wrong. Dorona began to disappear in front of AC. At the last moment, Dorona reappeared behind her. She's releasing a bolt of lightning and telling AC that her behavior had been the first to anger her. AC, confused, turned around just in time to see the lightning streak toward her. She quickly put up her shield, and the two forces collided in the center of the ring. The lightning that Dorona wielded began to sink lower, flying toward the ground. From above, it was clear that it was headed straight for the old man janitor, who stood unaware of the danger. Only when the lightning was mere centimeters away did he look up and see the bright glow. Xiangyi, noticing the threat, immediately broke gravity's laws and ran toward the janitor. A piece of lightning struck where he had been standing, sending both of them flying away. The lightning struck the floor, and Xiangyi landed in the ring with the old man on top of him. The crowd watched, particularly a man standing with a book who seemed intrigued by the scene. AC and Dorona stopped their argument and turned to look at the old man. After the explosion, Xian Yi and the old man were lying apart, groaning in pain. Xian Yi asked if the old man was okay, but the old man pointed at him, saying he was fine, but Xian Yi wasn't. Still stunned from the shock, Xian Yi groaned, realizing his cape and but were close to burning. He thought that if he had been attacked directly, he wouldn't have survived. His complaining was cut short when Dorona, sword raised, stood over him. He knelt while the blade pointing at his head, and asked what he was doing there. She questioning if he was sneaking in on classes. Xian Yi thought about how she knew he wasn't a student, then quickly explained that she almost hit the old man. He pointed to his right, asking where the old man had gone. Dorona looked around, confused, but as she pondered, she was called out. Turning, she saw the soldier with Isabella. The soldier told her not to get angry, explaining that Xian Yi and Yi Bei were friends of Sephisa's. Noticed, it was Akil. Dorona's expression changed, exclaiming it was Akil. She quickly rushed to him, grabbing his armor and asking if Sephisa's had come too. Akil quickly explained that Sephisa's was away on business, sending him in his place. Disappointing, she immediately turned and asked why he was there, and why the soldier had brought guests. Akil explained that they were new students, still undecided about their department. Dorona raised an eyebrow, questioning if they had been approved by Sephisa's. AC, floating over in her green ball, joined the conversation, asking if the principal knew about their presence. Akil quickly replied that the principal had already approved the leader's request. Dorona, still in disbelief, turned her attention to Isabella, standing beside the soldier with her arms crossed. But the only thing Dorona noticed was Isabella's breasts, making her feel self-conscious about her own flat chest and her tight suit. She quickly looked away, shifting her gaze to AC, whose breasts caught her attention as well. Realizing the situation, AC casually adjusted her position. The entire group of teachers and students moved toward the wall. One student told the regent's son that Isabella looked attractive, but Burei simply replied that he didn't see anything special about her. The soldier began introducing the teachers, but before he could finish, Dorona interrupted, insisting that the newcomers should demonstrate their strength. Xian Yi was confused, asking what kind of strength was being referred to, but Dorona wasted no time. She threw her sword into the ring, where it slammed into the concrete floor, and then asked which one of the new students would go first. Isabella, still with her arms crossed, waved her head in displeasure. Dorona then turned to AC, questioning why she wasn't doing anything. AC sighed and shook her head before letting out a nervous breath. She quickly jumped off her green ball and started to hurry somewhere. Turning around, she pointed her palm at the ball, which began to shrink before everyone's eyes. Eventually the ball is fitting in her hand. She walked over to Isabella and handed her the now compacted ball. Xian Yi turned to the Akil, asking if the magic ball was meant to assess a person's capabilities, which he surprised, asked how he doesn't know about borderline force. Xian Yi scratched the back of his head and nervously smiled, mentioning that he had lived with demons all his life. Contemplate, the man quickly cursed himself for asking public-known question. The soldier, realizing, remarked that he had forgotten Xian Yi had grown up with demons. He then began explaining to Xian Yi that all living things have a boundary force in this world. However, it wasn't readily usable. It requires developing one's abilities to reach a certain point, known as the boundary point. As the green ball in Isabella's hand started drawing energy from her, Xian Yi, he watched it mesmerized, still not fully understanding what the boundary energy was. The soldier explained that boundary energy was like water and that everyone had a cup to contain it. The size of the cup determined how much energy a person could hold. Boundary energy was built up through training, and it greatly increased strength. Student mages and swordsmen needed a large amount of energy, and those with small vessels couldn't enter either class, requiring them to seek another faculty. Moreover, he said the demons called this force magical power. They called boundary power the source of magic. Xian Yi thought to himself that boundary energy was essentially the same as magic, a source of energy. Isabella took the ball in her hands, standing still while Dorona watched her from behind. The crowd erupted, calling Isabella a hottie and urging her to join their class, mentioning how many cool guys were in it. The girls in the crowd snorted, calling the boys animals. Akil looked at Isabella and told Xian Yi that the ball was emitting a faint glow, meaning Isabella had an average score and could enter the magic class. Xian Yi asked what would happen if it didn't glow at all. The soldier replied if that the case, she would have to give up both swordsmanship and magic. Dorona thought to herself that now she understood why Sephisa's had sent her to study here. It was only because of her large breasts. As she was lost in thought, she turned to Isabella, impatient that it was taking too long. AC told Dorona to shut up, making her embarrassed. AC opened her eyes wide, and all she could say was that she could feel Isabella's energy. Isabella stood with the ball still in her hands, and the crowd began to murmur in confusion, wondering what was happening. She remained still, staring at the ball and the faint glow it emitted. Dorona, in bewilderment, exclaimed about what was going on. The soldier explained that Isabella was something special, and Xian Yi was awestruck. Burai, standing in the crowd with his friends, looked equally amazed and cheers rose from the crowd, impressed by Isabella's power. AC raised her hand and began summoning a glow, waving it toward Isabella. A green ball popped out of Isabella's hands and rose to eye level before floating just above her head. The ball flew toward AC, who took the ball and asked Isabella if she had studied energy before. Isabella replied that she had studied magic, but, for some unknown reason, her boundary force had disappeared. AC listened, sensing great power in Isabella despite her claim that her boundary force had vanished, something AC had never encountered in 1,000 years. AC approached Isabella, extended a hand, and told her she was accepted and could start classes immediately, with AC as her teacher. The crowd cheered, shouting that this hottie was going to study with them. Dorona, watching, wondered if she might change her mind about Isabella. AC, smiling, responded that Isabella was slightly weaker than Ren. The soldier, still shocked, noted Isabella's hands practically bursting with energy, while Xiangyi thought she wasn't a demon queen for nothing. Despite her lost boundary force, her potential was still incredible. Dorona stood next to Isabella and AC, congratulating AC on getting someone special as her pupil. Isabella sighed quietly and covered her eyes, her expression peaceful. Then she slowly walked toward the sword still stuck in the floor of the ring. She walked over, took hold of it at its base, and tried to pull it upward. AC, watching her, asked with a questioning look, "You already passed your test." Isabella approached the sword because she hadn't decided yet whether she wanted to pursue swordsmanship or magic. Dorona laughed, questioning if they thought they could join both the magic and swordsman classes. She picked up the sword, tracing its base, and revealed she'd been trained in swordsmanship by Eastern foreigners, though she rarely used it. The soldier interrupted, noting that the teacher had already praised her and questioning why she needed the sword. Isabella, looking at him menacingly, insisted that she wanted to try it. Dorona agreed and suggested they test her sword skills right away. She turned to her students, asking who would like to test the new student. Buri volunteered, eager to check her out, and his friend grinned. Buri assured that he'd go easy on her, while calling her little one with his creepy smile. They both stepped into the ring, and Buri declared he would see how she fared with his sword. The soldier marveled at how Buri seemed confident in testing his skills on Isabella. Dorona stepped in, reminding them that this was just a test fight, and no boundary force should be used. Buri confirmed he wouldn't hurt her. Xiangyi, standing nearby, warned Isabella to be careful, suggesting Buri seemed like a pervert. But Isabella dismissed his warnings, irritated by his constant concern. Dorona told them to start the fight. Buri quickly moved at a lightning speed, leaving his movement in a flash, charging at her with a sword in his full speed. Just then he about to strike her, but Isabella still remained standing firm with cool protagonist style. With a pervy menacing look on his face, he glances at her voluminous breasts in front of him. However, she easily using her sword to deflect his attack, causing him slightly off his balance to the side, but she remained poised, sword raised. He quickly turns and rushed toward her again. Then he leaped over her head, to attack from behind. Isabella dodged just in time, the sword point missing her face by inches. Buri landed on one knee, smiling sarcastically as he complimented her, saying she had a few tricks up her sleeve. Isabella simply snorted unfazed, but then she felt something lighter, and realized her bra strap had been cut. The students watching around the ring cheered for Buri, admiring his skill while their pervert face shamelessly shone in the public. Xiangyi, irritated by the boys' behavior, thought they were really out of their mind. Isabella adjusted her strap, and Buri made a triumphant chuckle. As soon as she fixed herself, he charged at her again. The sword slid across the smooth rank with sparks flying, heading straight for Isabella. But she crouched, dodging by lowering her head and torso, letting him rush past. In his bewilderment, she looked up, their swords clashing midair in a mighty struggle. With her strength, Isabella threw back the Buri's sword, sending it flying in the opposite direction. She didn't wait for his attack, instead, she launched her own. Buri quickly drew his sword, holding it at head level while covering himself with his left hand, then thrusting his sword toward her. Their swords made contact, sending sparks flying as they began to heat up. Isabella took the full brunt of his tempest, twisting her sword slightly to fend him off, and sweeping it across his blade as she deliberately walked past him. Buri, now off balance, flew forward, realizing too late that she was already drawing her weapon to stop him. He tried to defend himself, but she pushed him back a few meters with her strength. Enraged, his pupils constricted as fury filled his eyes. Isabella reappeared in front of him, and he instinctively put her hand over his head, retreating as she swung her sword. She skidded on her feet, causing them to rotate. Dorona's swordsmanship teacher, watching from the sidelines, suddenly recalled a long-forgotten technique. Meanwhile, Buri, on the defensive, growled in frustration. He cursed his situation, realizing he wouldn't last much longer. As his anger clouded his judgment, he tightened his grip on his sword, glowing blue as red energy swirled around him. In the next moment, the energy surged into his sword. Isabella stopped spinning, surprised at what she saw. Buri smiled a sinister grin, laughing nervously, as he directed a powerful stream of energy at her sword. She quickly realized what he had done and was momentarily thrown off balance. Xiang Yi, terrified, screamed her name as Buri smiled again, redirecting the sword slash with boundary force toward her. Isabella pivoted backward, dodging the attack. The mature person watching the fight uttered a phrase ice field, and pointed his hand at the ring, unleashing a blue glow from his gloved hand. A massive blue shield appeared in front of the boundary force sword slash. Running into the ring, he stood beside Isabella, holding the shield up. Frustrated by the turn of events, Buri hissed Ren's name, before lowering the shield and picking up Isabella, who still held her sword in her arms. Buri looked at them sullenly, but Ren carried Isabella out of the ring, gently setting her on her foot nearby and asking if she was okay. Just then, Xiang Yi approached, placing a hand on Ren's shoulder, and thanking him for saving his wife. Ren, discouraged, repeated the word wife, and the crowd echoed the same word. Xiang Yi asked Isabella if she was okay, and she snorted, dismissing Buri's behavior as childish. Dorona asked the soldier if they were truly married, and he confirmed it. Cyan delighted, she nodded victoriously, saying she should have mentioned it earlier. The soldier realized why Saphisas hadn't shown up that day. Dorona turned to Buri, telling him that she had warned him not to use boundary force. He denied it, claiming he had only used it in self-defense. AC teased him, saying that while they were all humans, Ren would always be stronger than him. She then turned to Xiang Yi to introduce her apprentice, To's Ren. She mentioned that he had likely found a worthy rival for the future. Ren closed his eyes and vowed to grow stronger. He slightly bows down to Isabella and Xiang Yi, promising to follow their example. Dorona turned to Isabella, mentioning that she had been trained in swordsmanship by teacher Mokia. Isabella closed her eyes and nodded, saying it was just the way he had trained her. She added that Mokia was very popular on the plains and known as the god of swords. Buri turned, surprised by her words, and his friends amazed at her strength, acknowledging that it was no wonder she was so skilled. Dorona chimed in, saying she had trained him too, realizing the techniques she used were the ones he had taught her. Isabella replied that her techniques were much stronger than Mokia's. Dorona laughed, impressed, then said from now on, Isabella could consider herself as one of her students. The boys near Buri were excited to have such a beauty in their class, but the regent's son wasn't pleased. The others didn't understand their excitement since Isabella hadn't yet decided which class she wanted to join. Xiang Yi teased her, recalling how Isabella had once teased him about sucking up, but she defended herself, agreeing that Dorona wasn't as good as she was in shape. Although she still thought Dorona was strong in her own rights. AC turned to Dorona, indignant that she was now Isabella's student, as she had chosen her first. Dorona countered that Isabella's sword skills were far better than her magic abilities, and if she joined her, it would waste time and potential. The soldier reminded them that it was Isabella's choice, not theirs, and both were furious. Isabella mulled over the options in her head, feeling hesitant. AC told Dorona that a fight would settle everything. Dorona agreed, saying she wasn't afraid of her interrupting. Xiang Yi, sensing the tension, asked what about his test. Dorona and AC looked at him, momentarily forgetting him. With sparkling eyes, he told them he also wanted to take the test. AC agreed and pointed a ball in his direction. Xiang Yi caught it with his hands, and examining the green ball, he focused, thinking that his entire life had led to this moment. Maybe the version of him in a world possesses enough magic to become a peacemaker. As he stared into the ball, he saw his reflection, waiting for it to blind everything with its light. The crowd began to murmur again, some doubting if Xiang Yi was as strong as Isabella, while others didn't believe so. 3 minutes passed, and the boredom was palpable. Someone asked if there was even a spark of light in the ball. Xiang Yi stood frozen, cold sweat dripping down his face, but the chatter continued. His anxiety grew, and more sweat ran down his face as he wondered why nothing was happening. Buri turned to his friend, commenting that Xiang Yi seemed just like a lowly commoner. His friend laughed, furious. AC took the ball from his hands, declaring it clear from the start that he was a useless lumber. She closed her eyes, exhaling, saying that she had tested him, and he should accept his failure. Xiang Yi asked what a useless lumber was, and the soldier explained it was a special kind of wood used for making houses and fires. Discriminated, Xiang Yi thought that he had also called people without potential useless logs, and loudly said he couldn't learn magic or swordsmanship. The soldier, nervous, looked at Xiang Yi with anxiety. AC added that without boundary force, he couldn't perform magic. Dorona consoled him, telling him he could train in swordsmanship, but he would never defeat someone using their boundary power. Xiang Yi stood there, lost in thought, caught between the soldier, Isabella, Dorona, and AC. Isabella looked to him with a sad face while he asked if there was no other way. Buri grudgingly shouted, questioning why he still didn't understand the teacher's explanations, and that he was a useless log. He warned that if Xiang Yi kept acting this way, everyone would think he was a fool. Xiang Yi stood still, hearing the crowd's insults, realizing that this was the end. He listened to the shouts, urging him to leave, and as he opened his eyes, he said that he had figured everything out long ago. He recalled when Saphisas told Haim that he might have potential in the culinary arts. Xiang Yi revealing that Saphisas had known about it all along, which was why he had told him so. At that moment, he was distracted as Isabella shouted for everyone's attention. She dared Buri to call him a trash one time. Buri, confused, asked if she wanted to fight him again. Xiangyi smiled victoriously, closing his eyes confidently, and then pulled Isabella toward him, saying that while he might be a useless lumber but his wife was the best and would always defend him. Furthermore, he smirking asked her if he was right while she's taking a glance at him. Swatting his hand away, she told him to move. He looks at the soldier, asking to see the other faculties, hoping he might be able to demonstrate something there. Turning back to Isabella, he told her to stay there. Whether learning swordsmanship or magic, she must study hard. He verbally supported her, saying she could achieve anything she set her mind to. Dorona suggested they return to class now that it was over, but AC protested, claiming it wasn't fair because she was her student. As they argued, they stood there, debating which class Isabella should belong to. Isabella, ignoring the teachers, turned to look at Xiangyi. They reached the next wall, entering a room with stone walls and a red roof above. A girl in a burgundy costume and cap flew by on a broomstick, breaking the long silence. Xiangyi turned to the soldier beside him. "You able to stop thinking about one thing?" He asked if it meant he wouldn't be allowed into the school since he couldn't use boundary force. The soldier, embarrassed, replied that it didn't matter which department he chose, it depended on how well he fit into each of them. As of now, he could only select non-combat faculties. Xiangyi frowned, muttering that he would just end up be a cook. The soldier interrupted, saying they were approaching the next faculty. Xiangyi grinned, asking what this faculty was and what they studied. They reached the door, and the soldier explained it was the blacksmithing department. As they stepped inside, they saw students sitting on the floor, staring at a sword stuck in a stage. Xiangyi was surprised, asking what they were doing, painting or something else. The students had pencil and paper in hand, sketching the sword on the stage. Upon closer inspection, Xiangyi saw the drawings were terrible. He approached one of the students, who was drawing with a clipboard held by a clothespin. Shocked and horrified by what he saw, Xiangyi commented that it looked ugly. Hearing that, two students quickly turned back to look at him. They both have intense gaze on our boy, asking what department he was from and why he was interfering with their class. Xiangyi apologized, explaining he was a new student. The student brushed him off, saying he was too busy to talk. Xiangyi bowed in apology, but the students turned away and scattered. Confused, Xiangyi asked the soldier why they were painting instead of learning to forge metal or grind knives. The soldier didn't understand the question and was about to leave when a voice interrupted them. Xiangyi turned around to see a bald man with a mustache standing before him. It was a forgery teacher, Ashtone Martin. The soldier saluted him, and the students followed suit. Master Ashtone Martin told the students to keep drawing, and Xiangyi was struck by his imposing presence. He nervously asked if they didn't know that the blacksmithing faculty could create anything. Sweat beaded on his face, unsure of what to say. The soldier explained that when Mr. Ashtone Martin was a boy, he had been enslaved by demons and didn't understand many things common to humans. Understand what he need to show. Mr. Ashtone said he would demonstrate how human blacksmiths work and moved toward the stage. He walked slowly passing his students. He climbed on the stage while Xiangyi stand behind the students wait to see his demo. Once in front of the sword stuck in the stage, he pulled out an object from his pocket that resembled a pencil. However, it looked more like a green pen with a red ribbon and a button below it. He gently held it in his hand and showed it to everyone. At that moment, the pen began to glow and transformed into an object the size of a sword. Xiangyi was stunned, wondering if magic was involved. Mr. Ashtone carefully grasped the pen-like sword by the hilt, which fit perfectly in his hand. He began moving it around the stage, and Xiangyi watched in confused, as he slowly drew the sword that was embedded in the stage. Upon finished the sketch, Mr. Ashtone shouted, awakening, the sound echoing off the walls. A blue, almost celestial glow emanated from the drawing. Mr. Ashtone knelt, and the glow continued. Xiangyi was left speechless by the display. The master tore his pen away from the stage and began to draw a sword across the glowing design. In the next moment, the sword was fully formed, lying on the stage as though it had just been forged. It began to slowly rise, floating toward Mr. Ashtone, who grasped the base of the sword and introduced it to his students. He turned to them, asking how they felt about the performance, and explained that this was how artwork was created. Xiangyi was amazed, wondered if the pen could create anything. Mr. Ashtone hopped off the stage and answered that it could, but only if Xiangyi had enough gold crystal alloy. When Xiangyi inquired if magic was used, Mr. Ashtone shook his head, stating that blacksmithing was not a magical class. Xiangyi, intrigued, thought to himself that if a sword could be made out of thin air, could a gun be created too? He asked Mr. Ashtone if the gold crystal alloy was magical. Mr. Ashtone smiled and explained that the crystal contained magic, even children could use it, and that there were different types of crystal alloys. However, his pen is made out of a special type crystal that allowed it to recreate masterpieces and could create many items from ordinary air. Xiangyi, holding the sword, asked if the pen was omnipotent power, wondering if it could summon his boundary force. Mr. Ashtone, horrified, immediately realized Xiang Yi was just a dreamer, and told him not to think of such things while laughing. Hearing that, the student with the glasses asked him what he was talking about. Others started shouting that boundary force was nothing special, and people with such energy could never build weapons like those, and many students agreed. The soldier whispered in Xiang Yi's ear not to mention frontier energy in places like this again, as most of the people in this faculty were useless lumber. Xiang Yi, unfazed, suddenly shouted that this was the most wonderful thing he had heard all day. He turned away from the soldiers and ran to Mr. Ashtone, falling to his knees before him. Xiang Yi knelt before Mr. Ashtone, pleading to be taken as his student. Mr. Ashtone, confused at first, quickly realized what was happening and asked Xiang Yi if he truly wanted to study blacksmithing so badly. With hopeful eyes, Xiang Yi blurted out that he was just a useless lumber, like everyone else here. The students in the audience were shocked by his words, unable to believe what they heard. Xiang Yi quickly grabbed a pad of paper and a pencil, swiftly sketching an image. The familiar figure of a woman began to take shape on the page, and when the students saw it, they instantly recognized Anna, the swordsmanship teacher, in the drawing. The student whose drawing Xiang Yi had criticized earlier remarked that Xiang Yi was quite good. A few minutes later, Xiang Yi showed Mr. Ashtone the completed drawing. The teacher, impressed, said it was excellent and that his skills were beyond the minimum requirement for the class. The soldier, seeing the drawing, couldn't believe his eyes, astonished by Xiang Yi's talent. Xiang Yi humbly dismissed it, admitting that drawing was his only skill. Mr. Ashtone explained that while learning a trade wasn't considered as important as other departments, those who excelled at it were highly sought after. Xiang Yi reflected that drawing in this world seemed to be a blessing and told Mr. Ashtone that crafting also played a crucial role, much like other fields. He found the idea of creating objects through regular drawing fascinating. The arrogant student, who had been insulted by Xiang Yi, interrupted, stating that there were a few fundamental rules of blacksmithing to understand. First, items had to sustain living creatures. Second, stealing or dismantling items was forbidden. Third, only inanimate objects could be created. Xiang Yi, impressed by the teacher's fairness, thought the rules were reasonable. He was certain that with Mr. Ashtone, he wouldn't regret his choice of faculty. As his thoughts lingered, he knelt again, begging to be accepted as Mr. Ashtone's student. The soldier, stepping forward, mentioned that he was a friend of the leader of the White Dragon Group and would be grateful if Mr. Ashtone accepted Xiang Yi as his student. The green-haired student observed that not only was Xiang Yi talented, but he also had strong connections. Mr. Ashtone finally acknowledged Xiang Yi's potential. With a smile, he placed his hands on Xiang Yi's shoulders and assured him he couldn't let such a talented student slip away. Reaching into his pocket, Mr. Ashtone pulled out a spiritual crystal pen and handed it to Xiang Yi. This pen was the introductory pen for all students entering the class. Xiang Yi, filled with joy, held the pen with reverence, marveling at its magical appearance. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and wonder as he thought about the tasks and responsibilities awaiting him in the royal palace. As the first light of day began to break, His Majesty remained seated on his throne, his gaze fixed nervously on the regent, Tolls Angus. The regent stood at the base of the pedestal, addressing His Majesty with authority. He demanded that His Majesty take action. But just as the tension built, the doors burst open. Two men entered the room, calling out to His Majesty Mr. Guro and his son, Sophises. Relief, the king thought finally he got some help. Mr. Guro began by expressing his concern over the regent's proposal to execute the Minister of Agriculture and the leader of the Grey Dragon Group. Turning to Angus, he asked why such a ridiculous idea had been put forward. Angus explained that he had sent a scouting team to investigate rumors of illegal transactions, suggesting that the Secretary of Agriculture had been associating with creatures from the east. He also mentioned that the leader of the Grey Dragon Group had been sending food to their army, an unauthorized transfer of military supplies that warranted 100 years in prison. Mr. Guro responded by pointing out that the East had been suffering from a drought, and their decision to provide food was meant to foster peace between the two nations. He emphasized that the aid would not only help during a time of crisis, but also build a benevolent relationship. His Majesty, surprised by these words, considered them carefully. Angus, however, scoffed, dismissing the idea of peace and labeling the Eastern creatures as beneath them. He questioned why they would suddenly seek peace. He further criticized the lack of advance warning about the situation. Mr. Guro, frustrated, countered that they had no time to report, as lives were at risk. If they had waited, many could have perished. The argument continued, but Angus interrupted, repeating that the creatures were always beneath them. His Majesty, sitting silently on his throne, waited for the squabble to end. Finally, with a commanding voice like thunder, he declared that it was too late. He turned to his men and ordered them to bring the prisoners. In the next instant, enormous chains appeared, large enough to hold the world's largest creatures. Figures emerged in the doorway, bound together by chains, dragged forward by Angus's men. They were restrained by metal hoops around their necks and legs. Angus's man looks to His Majesty, reporting that they had captured them. Mr. Guro stared, disbelief spreading across his face as he saw who was being brought before them. The first figure was a lizard-headed man, towering over the average human, none other than the sword master, Mokia. The second was another lizard-headed man, but gray in color, equally large General Baru. Without hesitation, the two lizard men saluted the regent. Mr. Guro, furious, demanded to know why they had gone this far. But Angus ignored him and telling them to open the boxes they carried. Mokia and General Baru bring the boxes to closer, and they carefully unlatch the boxes, revealing a horrifying sight: severed heads. The heads of the Grey Dragon team leader and commander, His Majesty, Mr. Guro, and Cephesus stared up at them, rendering everyone dumbfounded by the gruesome display. The king watched in silence, his gaze shifting between the men before him. The only words he could muster were a single question: why? The regent, however, spoke calmly, explaining that he understood His Majesty's good heart, but he insisted that men like him should handle the dirty work. He declared the Grey Dragon team would transfer under Saad's command, and within a week, both the Black and Grey Dragon teams would launch an attack to annihilate the eastern tribes. Mokia and General Baru were horrified, unable to comprehend the sudden cruelty they were being subjected to. Mokia approached the regent, asking why he was doing this, as he only wanted to help. He continued pleading for his people, but Sato sharply pulled on the chains, to subdue and silence them. The regent mocked their situation, telling them that they should not beg for mercy, labeling them as pathetic. General Baru urged Mokia to forget it. He reaffirming his belief that men were the most treacherous of creatures, their hearts steeped in darkness. Hearing that, Mr. Guro looks at him, exclaimed his name in his thought. His face twisted in anger, as he realized how bad things had become. Back to the king, he advised that they stop now and avoid creating unnecessary tensions with other races. But His Majesty was too stunned to respond coherently, muttering a single word as he processed the chaos unfolding before him. Sato grinned, and at that moment, he released the chains holding Mokia and Baru. Mokia, feeling the weight lifted, breathed a sigh of relief. His energy began to return, but Sato did not let go. The chains broke free on their own, and chaos erupted. Mokia, enraged, yelled for someone to stop him. Shout that war had been declared on his people. With a fierce surge of power, he leapt toward the king's pedestal, bypassing Mr. Guro and Angus. His massive claw charged with yellow energy. Before he could reach the king, his energy claw sword-like was blocked by a sword. Standing there, Cephesus holding a sword in hand blocked his path. The leader of the White Dragon group demanded respect for the king, but in response, he pushed Mokia aside. Mokia fell to the ground, shouting his name in defiance. But in an instant, Cephesus's sword pierced Mokia's chest, declaring that he was not worthy of the title of Swordmaster if he were to die by his sword's sword. Moreover, Cephesus offers that he will be the one who put him to rest for good. With bitterness in his eyes, Mokia resigned himself to his fate, asking to be seen off on his final journey. Sato quickly ran to His Majesty, asking if he was alright. He then performs a no-mercy stun to decapitate Mokia's head from his lifeless body to show his loyalty for His Majesty. And His Majesty, witnessing the horror, felt tears welling in his eyes. Mr. Guro stood motionless, his insides seething with indignation, while the regent simply lowered his eyes in a victorious silence. In the same moment, a smile softened the regent's face. The city basked in the bright daylight, the sun shining in its full glory. Xiang Yi and the soldier were walking together around the academy, their spirits lifted. Suddenly, Xiang Yi paused, his eyes narrowing as he saw something in the distance. A portal stood before him, and people were emerging from it. His heart skipped a beat. Finally, they were here. A girl stepped through the portal, and Xiang Yi couldn't help but think back to similar portals he'd seen in video games. He turned to the soldier beside him, curious, and asked where these portals led. The soldier explained that they were used to transport students from the academy to their dorms, as the dorms were far from the school due to the large student population. He explained the portal led to the northern dorms. Xiang Yi learned the eastern dorms were better but costlier, while weakened security had lowered northern dorm prices. Xiang Yi, intrigued, realized that the area they were in was a rich neighborhood, while the other side of the portal was the poorer part. The soldier then remarked that if Xiang Yi wanted to stay at the academy, he would need to live on campus. He also noted that even though Cephesus was a great guy, sometimes it felt like Cephesus looked at him strangely. Xiang Yi decided it was time to return and asked the soldier to thank Cephesus for him. The soldier, confused, replied that Cephesus had already arranged everything for him. The soldier took out a set of keys and handed them over. Xiang Yi, puzzled, asked what they were for. The soldier explained that Cephesus had asked him to bring him back, if he didn't want to stay, would arrange other accommodations. He added, "There is a residence within eastern dorms." Contemplating, Xiang Yi thought that Cephesus was indeed a good guy, and if he ended up in demon territory, he'll do everything in his power to find Cephesus's little brother. Elsewhere, Cephesus and Mr. Guro walked through the vast corridors of the academy. Cephesus turned to his father, asking if he thought His Majesty would truly listen to them. Mr. Guro, his voice thick with anger, responded that the Minister of Agriculture and the leader of the Grey Dragon team were his best men. If His Majesty wanted to eliminate them, he would search the entire plain to prove him wrong and prevent him from going too far. They reached a building guarded by many soldiers. One of the soldiers spotted them and greeted Cephisas. Cephisas orders him to inform His Highness that his father has things to discuss, which the soldier explained that His Highness expecting Mr. Guro will come. This is why they were told to wait on side. Mr. Guro commented that it seemed like His Majesty shared their concerns. Cephisas, however, turned to the soldier with a piercing gaze. The soldier informed Cephisas that His Majesty allowed only Mr. Guro and himself in the room. Curious, Cephisas asked this is what exactly His Majesty wanted. The soldier bowed again, confirming that only Mr. Guro and Cephisas were permitted in the room. Mr. Guro walked past the soldier, telling Cephisas to wait outside. Cephisas' senses were heightened, as if he knew something was about to unfold. He watched his father move deeper into the hall, calling out to His Majesty, but no response came. A heavy silence hung in the air. He, sensing something was wrong, stood frozen. His instincts told him His Majesty was not there. A voice broke the silence from behind. It was Tolls Angus, the one who had arranged the riding and archery lessons for His Majesty. Angus remarked that he hoped the events of the day hadn't frightened Mr. Guro too much. Stunned, Mr. Guro stood unmoving, his anger barely contained. The sun had set, casting an amber glow over the castle, and lanterns lit the path of the soldiers stationed outside. Cephisas remained where he had parted ways with his father. His head was down, eyes closed, arms crossed. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, sensing someone behind him. Without hesitation, he spun around, ready for confrontation. It was Sato, the man always at Tolls Angus's side. Sato called his name, and Cephisas, now on alert, demanded to know what he was doing there. Sato stepped forward and explained that Cephisas had always led the White Dragon team into battle alone. But he questioned whether Cephisas understood that the White Dragon team was supposed to strictly obey His Majesty. Unfazed, Cephisas reminded him that the White Dragon team existed solely to protect His Majesty, regardless of who led it. Sato shot back that His Majesty was still young, and therefore, the leader of the White Dragon team should naturally defer to the regent. As Cephisas and Sato exchanged words, a noise interrupted them. Cephisas' gaze shifted to the entrance of the room, where soldiers stood at attention, their faces resolute. He furrowed his brow, anger building, cursing himself for standing idle. He then moved swiftly toward the door. However, Sato smirked, warning Cephisas that if he's thinking about entering, he'll be risking his life for that. Cephisas asked to him, his voice low and menacing, demanding to know what their plan was to destroy his father. Sato laughed, not just a chuckle, but a mad, unsettling laugh. He stopped abruptly, his eyes flashing with fury, and scoffed that the regent controlled everything, even their every move. Cephisas' hand instinctively reached for his sword, drawing it slowly and deliberately. The blade now pressed against Sato's throat, and Cephisas, eyes narrowed, demanded to know why they were going to destroy him. Sato, unfazed, lowered his hand from his face and retorted that Guro was nothing more than his father, powerless to affect his fate. Sato sneered, mocking Cephisas' desire for heroism. Cephisas growled, his voice cold and resolute, that if S had the audacity to threaten his father, he wouldn't deserve forgiveness. Sato, with a calm, satisfied look, reassured Cephisas not to worry, claiming that the regent merely intended to show Guro his true standing in the capital. Cephisas pressed further, asking about the real situation in the capital. Sato smirked, closing his eyes with a gesture of indifference. Before he walked away, he advised Cephisas to rest, assuring him that Guro would be fine. However, if Cephisas wanted to kill him, he quickly turned back with those green eyes and demonic smirk. He'd really want to see him try with the provoking tone. Cephisas tensed at the implication, his alertness heightening. Meanwhile, night had already fallen over. At Eastern Dormitory, the stars twinkling brightly, Xiangyi walked toward his door, his thoughts wandering to the marvelous East Campus, reminiscent of his old high school days. As he inserted the key into the lock and turned it, he stepped inside. Before closing the door, he noticed a figure from the corner of his eye. Turning sharply, he blushed, his mouth agape. There stood Isabella, dressed in a pink gown. Xiangyi quickly covered his eyes, asking what she was doing in his room. He stood frozen, eyes closed, waiting for her response. When he finally lowered his hands, a satisfied look crossed his face as he asked why she hadn't hit him yet. Isabella, standing with a smile, remarked that he'd seen too much already. Did it even matter? Xiangyi, somewhat amused, suggested that the soldier had probably planned for them to be together from the start. Isabella sat with Xiangyi beside her, pledging his support. She admitted confusion about others' intentions but noted their care had been generous. Her gaze turned to the bedside table, where everything they needed had been provided. Xiangyi picked up a pouch with a gold coin inside, mentioning he didn't know what it could buy but thought it might be enough for some food. Xiangyi, turning to her, said that they were already near the central square and could escape. Isabella, however, told him not to be foolish. The academy had strict surveillance over its students, and any attempt to escape would be noticed. She explained that the east and north campuses were surrounded by a magical force field, a protective barrier so strong that even a magic teacher couldn't get through. Xiang Yi, curious, asked what their plan was. Isabella, however, explained that she had lost her powers and would remain there until she regained her strength. The demon clan only accepted a leader stronger than themselves, and she wouldn't return unless she regained at least a fraction of her power. She frowned, adding that they wouldn't accept such a weakling as their leader. Xiang Yi, sitting next to her on the bed, said it sounded cruel. But he reassured her not to worry because she has him. He promised that he would bring her home, destroy the traitors, and restore her to her rightful place as head. Isabella, confused by his words, looked at him in puzzlement. He smiled and raised a quill, explaining he had found the perfect path for himself, the faculty of forgery. He was convinced that with hard work, forgery would make him omnipotent. Isabella, somewhat relieved by his words, asked if that was truly the case. Xiang Yi, full of determination, questioned her, asking if she had decided what to study. She responded that, for now, she would focus on building her strength, learning both magic and combat in the process. Later, both teachers accepted Isabella's decision. Xiang Yi lay back on the bed, summarizing her words. She would now be both a swordsman and a mage. She turned to him with a bemused look, telling him that only he could come up with such a crazy combination. He shrugged, confident in his reasoning, as she would use both magic and a sword. When he asked if that was what they were doing here, she stared at him, curious, then quickly covered her eyes and looked away, embarrassed. After a moment, she turned back, asking what he had left on her bed. With a smile, Xiang Yi explained that he was there because they were married. She snorted at first but quickly turned away, blushing. She explained that it was because he had called her his wife in front of everyone. Xiang Yi, laying back on the bed, thought she was aggressive and cold most of the time, but when she was shy, she was unexpectedly cute. He then added that he had said it so no one would mess with her, as she attracted a lot of attention. Isabella sat on the bed, thanking him, to which he reassured her, saying they were married, and it was no big deal. Suddenly, she points a sword at him, making him shocked, jokingly asked her if she wanted to commit murder in this marriage. With intimidating aura, she demands him to get off the bed. Step off the bed, the guy's muttering that he would dead if he tried to hide from her. Xiang Yi, already turned away, lay under the blanket on the floor. Xiang Yi pulled out his quill, contemplating that whatever he drew would become real. He wondered about the limits of creating objects. Morning came, and sunlight streamed through the windows. Isabella woke up, squinting against the rays. Her gaze fell on a strange figure sitting by her bedside. Alert, she grabbed the sword next to her pillow and pointed it at the figure, demanding to know who it was. Her vision was still blurry, but the sword remained aimed at the figure's back. She asked what the intruder was doing in her room. But when the figure didn't move, Isabella lowered her weapon, confused. The figure turned out to be a stone statue of herself. Sweat beaded on her cheek as she questioned where it had come from. She noticed strange objects made of the same material, as the statue scattered on the floor. Isabella, still in her pink nightie and matching slippers, stared at a large stone cannon shaped like a machine gun and some animal-like figure. Think this must be the idiot Xiang Yi is doing. She couldn't understand why they were so oddly shaped. She covered her face, frustrated, and thought that she must have overworked herself yesterday. She hadn't even woken up despite the noise. Deciding to leave, Isabella stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. She glanced around, still puzzled by the strange objects. In the hallway, she found a car made of the same stone material, surrounded by students. Isabella looked at everything in shock, still unsure of what she was seeing. Isabella heard the exclamations of people and noticed a large stone giant coming into view. No one knew who had brought it there, but she decided she would deal with it later. As the sun shone over the east wing, signaling it was daytime, a small group of people, led by the man who had brought them in, gathered. Master Ashtone Martin turned to his students and asked where Xiang Yi was, since he was late and hadn't arrived yet. The guy with green hair suggested going to get him, but the teacher stopped him, saying it was unnecessary, and started the class. The streets echoed with loud voices shouting about his lateness, followed by the ringing of the green bell, signaling the start of the day. The wheels of a wooden bicycles rolled leisurely down the road, casting shadows on the asphalt. Xiang Yi sped past, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. As he rushed by, the group of students led by Ashtone Martin watched in amaze. The master asked what it was. The green hair repeated the question, and he surprisingly called it a new expensive children's toy. Feeling proud, Xiang Yi wonders how he can explain to them. Xiang Yi, feeling a little embarrassed, explained that it was called a pedal bike. Ashtone Martin was taken aback, having only ever ridden a horse-drawn carriage or a gnome steam engine. This was his first time seeing transportation powered by human strength. Xiang Yi scratched the back of his head, unsure how to respond. Just then, the trio's students approached him. They are eagerly asking if they could try it out. Xiang Yi nodded enthusiastically, telling them to go ahead. As he turned around, he saw Mr. Ashtone Martin already attempting to ride the wooden bike. The student stood by, watching as the teacher apologized, saying he couldn't help himself. The green-haired student reassured him that it was fine and they'd wait. Mr. Ashtone turned back to Xiang Yi and asked how to operate it. Xiang Yi guided him, holding onto the teacher's arm to help him maintain his balance. He instructed Martin to place his feet on the pedals and start spinning them. Despite his nervousness, Mr. Ashtone tried, while Xiang Yi carefully guided him step by step. First, he pushed with his left foot, then repeated the movement with his right. Mr. Ashtone let out a startled yell as he struggled to keep his balance. Xiang Yi encouraged him, saying it was only hard at first. Once he got used to it, it would be easier. He told Mr. Ashtone to use more force, gradually speeding up while finding his balance. Xiang Yi walked alongside him, offering support. After a while, he let go and urged the teacher to learn from experience. The students cheered as they watched Mr. Ashtone Martin ride past the grocery store, still shaky but beginning to get the hang of it. After a few more tries, he seemed to figure out the motion and how to operate the bike more smoothly. The students were mesmerized, excited to see their teacher mastering the new transportation. Mr. Ashtone yelled to Xiang Yi, amazed at how he seemed to have learned to control the bike, marveling at its continuous motion. Xiang Yi looked at him with pride, declaring that he had mastered the technique. The students were impressed, saying the bicycle was a fantastic invention that would help many future generations. Xiang Yi, lost in thought, imagined inventing the internal combustion engine and becoming the most famous person in the world. His thoughts were interrupted when the teacher asked how to stop the bike. He turned around in horror, realizing he had forgotten to draw the brake. Panicking, he yelled at Mr. Ashtone to stop pedaling, but it was too late. He had already gone too far. Then, the teacher crashed into a tree, sending 2 birds flying. Mr. Ashtone wiped his forehead, apologizing and admitting he had overdone it. The students looked at the broken bike, blaming the teacher for the accident. They exclaimed their disappointment, lamenting the loss of such a beautiful invention. However, Xiang Yi reassured them not to worry, saying he could easily draw another one, even better than the last. The teacher and the students urged Xiang Yi to start drawing, but he nervously smiled and admitted he couldn't, as he had already used up all the gold alloy stone. Everyone was stunned by his statement, and the teacher asked how he could have used all of it in one night. The guy with green hair mentioned that the rock was enough to build an entire house. Xiang Yi points his finger up and explained he had been experimenting with the pen, which was why it turned out this way. He remembered how the quill worked by using the power of thought. The material could be transformed into anything, and all he had to do was mentally visualize it and draw a sketch. Xiang Yi wondered what this world would be like if he brought inventions from his world. But the teacher pointed out that the highest level of gold alloy stone was needed to create objects without any material. At the stone's starting level, he needed the same amount of material from the world to create an item. The first thing Xiang Yi had drawn was a touchscreen phone. After the phone materialized from the stone, it was entirely made of stone, and it unusable. Realizing he didn't know how the mechanisms worked, he felt disappointed that he'd never be able to construct a functional phone. The same happened with the TV, refrigerator, and car. All were useless. Xiang Yi also realized he didn't have the right material to create these items. Unsure of what to do, the teacher asked him sort of experimental creations he drew. Xiang Yi smiled sheepishly and scratched the back of his head. Then, the guy with green hair flew up to him, asking what kind of things he was drawing. Xiang Yi smiled and told everyone not to ask him anything, as they would all fail in just a few minutes. At the forgery classroom, now, the teacher and students entered, and a large painting of a man with golden hair hung on the wall. Mr. Ashtone Martin walked over to a table beside the painting, picked up a metal box, and pulled out a small glowing pebble that looked like a tiny pea. He inserted the blue pebble into the quill Xiang Yi had given him and turned to the students, saying they were almost out of stone. Handing the quill back to Xiang Yi, he was reminded to use it more sparingly. Xiang Yi looked at the quill, contemplating his experiments, and the teacher addressed the class, encouraging them to draw more to improve their craft. He also planned to teach them about the differences in gold-stone alloys and their usages. Everyone sat down, while Xiang Yi stood, prompting his classmates to pull him down and invite him to sit with them. The teacher began his lecture. Turning his back from the students, he reached for a box on the table. He pushed a button on it, and the lid flipped open. Inside were 4 sets of quills, neatly laid on red velvet. But that wasn't all. The box opened further, revealing stones arranged in a glass flask. As it opened again, larger quills and more stones appeared, with the box revealing a total of 4 tiers. The teacher asked if they knew why the stones were placed in pens instead of being used directly for forging. The green-haired man explained that the stones possessed immense power, making them difficult to control if used directly. Xiang Yi was surprised by the answer, and the teacher acknowledged that the student was correct. He then shared that 2 decades ago, he visited a settlement of dwarves who had perfected the use of the stone in their creations, the group of the legendary Forger's Master. They embedded the stones in hammers for forging, creating beautiful yet durable items at the cost of the user's health. He later thought about maturing the stones to adapt them for use in smaller tools, preserving their effectiveness. After extensive research, he discovered an effective way to control the stone's powers. The way that he always teaches his students of forgery class, creating objects by drawing them. Xiang Yi thought to himself that this must be the root of forgery, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Xiang Yi, still curious, raised his hand and asked where the golden alloy stone came from. Mr. Ashtone explained that the stone was quarried on the eastern border of the capital, and all the stone they used came from that area. The guy with green hair added that he had heard of another stone being mined in the golden dragon's habitat, confirming that it was a dangerous dragon compared to others. Xiang Yi thought to himself that if they killed this dragon, they could obtain a lot of golden stone. The teacher confirmed this, saying that His Majesty had ordered the Purple Dragon team to mine the material. They were responsible for collecting the stone, cleaning it, and selling it for military funding. He then held up a piece of stone and remarked that it was worth about 10 gold coins. The students were taken aback by the high cost of the stones, realizing that they carried 10 gold coins with them every day. Xiang Yi turned to the guy with green hair, Moto, and asked him what 1 gold coin could get. Moto replied that 1 gold coin could be exchanged for 10 silver coins. But Xiang Yi pressed further, asking how much food 1 gold coin could buy and how many people it could feed. Moto explained that 1 gold coin was enough for 50 bags of food, and each bag could feed 1 person for a month. Xiang Yi was struck by the realization that 50 people could be fed for a month with just 1 gold coin. The weight of this thought horrified him, and his face creased in shock. Moto then pointed out that Xiang Yi had unknowingly spent the monthly food costs for 500 people in just one night. The teacher, continuing his lesson, explained that the crystalline stones he held were the lowest tier of gold alloy stone. He showed a glass flask containing these stones, saying crystal stones were the lowest grade, while medium-level stones could reach up to 50 gold coins each. These stones were made of 3 lower-level stones joined together, amplifying the stone's power threefold. The teacher explained that the only advantage of these stones was their slightly better efficiency compared to lower-tiered ones. They also had an extra function, justifying their higher price. Despite their increased effectiveness, their additional properties were not useful for their current needs. There were 3 flasks of stones in the box, and the teacher then introduced the top-level gold alloy stones, shocking the students. They marveled at the high price, as the medium-level stones were already worth 50 gold coins. The teacher continued, explaining that top-level stones were incredibly rare. The sea-wave-colored stone, called the Aqua Magical Stone, was worth 100 gold coins. Hearing that, Xiang Yi and the trio are sweating bullet of cost 100 gold coins. The Aqua Magical Stone possesses both water and wood properties, allowing any scrap wood to be forged into high-quality wood, typically used for repairing wooden items. This purple stone, known as the Purple Bolt Stone, harnesses electricity. It can slice through items with strokes and calibrate items that are out of sync. Its value is 300 gold coins. The red stone, called the Fire Crystal Stone, harnesses fire and metal elements. It transforms input materials into metals and strengthens existing metals. Its value is 500 gold coins. The students were in awe, talking among themselves about how they had never seen so much wealth in one place, marveling at how rich their teacher must be. The teacher smiled and explained that such expensive stones were rarely used. Wealthy magicians embed these stones in their staffs as substitutes for magic. The fire crystal summons fireballs, the purple bolt summons thunderstorms, and the aqua magical summons water waves. Xiang Yi reflected on the fact that one could use magic with these stones even without possessing boundary force. The teacher then drew attention to a pale moonstone in his quill. He calling it the ultra-rare alloy stone of all mankind, one that only he possessed. Moto speculated that the stone could be worth over 100,000 gold coins, and others agreed. Xiang Yi, watching the conversation, thought about how the pale moonstone didn't require any material to be created, drawing was enough. Dreaming, he thought if he could own a stone like that, and imagined himself sitting on a throne with Isabella in his arms, feeding him grapes, and his foot on the pervert Buri's back. He envisioned gaining power over the world. Mr. Ashtone shared that when he was young, he learned the craft from the dwarves. He spoke of the gnome tribe's isolation, and their reluctance to communicate with other peoples. However, they saw his desire for knowledge and accepted him as a student. During his time with them, he gained their friendship and trust. They also invented a new forging method together. The dwarves had only 4 pale moonstones in their settlement, and Martin earned one for his accomplishments reward. With this stone, he had created the walls around the city. Moto was shocked by the stone's value, thinking it must have been a really expensive gift. And Xiang Yi thought to himself that if the pale moonstone was so powerful, the dwarves must have been far stronger than Demon Tribe. Mr. Ashtone explained that the pale moonstone was infinite and didn't require any material to create anything. The only downside was that it gradually pulled the consciousness of the person who wielded it. Xiang Yi was horrified by this revelation and muttered the word consciousness. One student, curious, asked if the teacher had built so much, meaning the stone didn't affect him. Moto responded that the teacher had suffered greatly for the kingdom. He then pointed to the picture on the wall, asking the students to look more closely. The students stared at the picture, commenting on how handsome the man in the photo was, but not understanding its connection to the teacher. Moto explained that the man in the photo was actually their teacher, 10 years ago. Everyone was stunned, unable to believe it, only recognizing the eyebrows as the same. The teacher, nervously wiping cold sweat from his brow, confirmed it was indeed him. The students were in disbelief, shocked at the revelation. The midday sun shone brightly over the castle, casting light on everything around it. Cephesus stood at the threshold of a huge building. He seems to waiting for someone. He looked to his right and saw a carriage with 3 horses, 2 white and 1 black approaching. The carriage stopped just outside the entrance to the palace. From it emerged the figure of Mr. Guro. Mr. Guro opened the carriage door, quickly exiting and shutting it behind him. Cephesus, already running towards him, called out. As the carriage moved away, Mr. Guro staggered slightly to the left. Cephesus immediately grabbed his father's hand, supporting him, and asked what had happened. Looking at his father, whose calm demeanor seemed out of place, Cephesus's concern deepened. He began firing questions about injuries, but Mr. Guro pushed him away and told him to leave him alone. Struggling to his feet, Mr. Guro began shouting that it was over, his body trembling with anxiety. His face looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept for days, repeatedly murmuring that everything had come to an end. Nervously and maliciously, Mr. Guro started laughing. Cephesus tried to get closer, calling for his father to calm down, and questioning what had been done to him. But Mr. Guro simply started walking toward the building, declaring that nothing would change and laughing again. Meanwhile, a sunny afternoon brightened the academy where Isabella and Xiangyu were studying. Isabella stood blindfolded in the training field, sword in hand, while 3 small arrows flew toward her from behind. She perked up her ears, sensing the movement, and quickly spun around, slicing through all 3 arrows. Another wave arrows attack appeared from the left. She swiftly turned to sense them again. Her quick movement has destroying them as well, her focus unbroken. Despite the heat and sweat dripping down her face, Isabella stood in the ring, awaiting the next barrage of arrows. Just then, Dorona approached, praising her performance. She felt the urge to remove her blindfold, but a sense of fatigue overtook her. Frowning, she realized she was no longer as capable as she once was. Dorona observed her closely, her gaze wary. And when Isabella turned her hand, she noticed a bloody scratch. She reminded her to practice more before when she leave there. Isabella glanced at her fellow students, mostly lying with arrows in their bodies, as the teacher noted her progress, saying she was learning faster than the others. Isabella nodded, assuring him that she would indeed remember to practice. As dusk fell, casting an orange glow over the academy, Isabella walked wearily into the east wing. She opened the door to her room, only to be shocked by what she saw. Standing before her were her 2 teachers, Miss Dorona and Miss Acey, dressed in swimsuits. Surprised, Isabella asked what they were doing in her room, puzzled as she studied Miss Wadley's hat. The teachers remained silent, and Isabella, unable to understand. She approached them. When she touched them, she realized they were stone statues. From behind the door, someone peeked out, asking if Isabella thought they were truly good. Isabella asked how he had managed to color the stone statues. He explained that he had added dye to the original material, which gave them their color. He then began drawing something on the floor, claiming that in the future, he would create many things she had never seen. Isabella reached down, touching a paper on the floor, and asked about the figures drawn on it. He told her the figures were given to him by his teacher, Mr. Ashtone, who had brought the blueprints from the dwarves' tribe. He mentioned that the dwarves' knowledge had surpassed the demons, and that they had invented the steam engine, using it in trains. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.